Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock, you're watching Sky News Breakfast. So Keir Starmer hails Labour's victory over the SNP in Rutherglen and Hamilton West as a seismic moment. It's Friday the 6th of October.
Michael Shanks, Scottish Labour Party, 17,840.
It's the first time that Labour has ever won a seat from the SNP in a by-election, and they did it with a swing of more than 20%. Also ahead, 43 million children forced to abandon their homes and schools because of floods, storms and wildfires in the past 6 years. 5 charged after Just Stop Oil protesters disrupt Les Miserables.
Also ahead, Elizabeth Hurley tells me why it's so important for women to take control of their bodies and regularly check for signs of breast cancer.
Be persistent if you really feel there's something wrong, and don't be scared to ask for help, but go quickly. Quickly. Speed is of the essence.
And after a week of VAR controversy, Liverpool returned to action with a 2-0 win in the Europa League.
Hello, very good morning. Thanks for joining us. So Keir Starmer is claiming what he calls a seismic win over the SNP in Scotland. A swing of more than 20% to Labour saw candidate Michael Shanks take Rutherglen and Hamilton West, the first time they've ever won a seat at a by-election from the Nationalists. Well, the vote was triggered after the incumbent Margaret Ferrier was suspended from Parliament for breaching COVID rules in 2020. So let's take a closer look at the results. And Scottish Labour's Michael Shanks won with 17,845 votes. That's more than double the SNP with 8,399. And the Scottish Conservatives lost their deposit with just 1,192 votes. Well, Labour received 58.6% of the vote, well ahead of the SNP on 27.6%. The Conservatives took just 3.9%. Well, we can compare those results with the last election in 2019. Labour have gained 24.1% of votes this time round. The SNP have lost 16.6%. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, reports.
A jubilant welcome for Labour's newest MP, Michael Shanks, as he arrived at the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election count with the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar. The result was never in doubt on the night. The only issue was whether Labour's victory would be big enough to provide a springboard for major gains from the SNP for Sir Keir Starmer at the general election.
Michael Shanks, Scottish Labour Party, 17,840.
Minutes later came confirmation that Mr Shanks had overturned an SNP majority of more than 5,000 into a Labour majority approaching 10,000, with a massive swing of more than 20%.
And I declare that Michael Shanks is elected to serve in the United Kingdom Parliament as a member for Rutherglen and Hamilton West constituency.
Mr Shanks claimed the Labour Party is on the way back.
There's absolutely no doubt that this result shows that there's no part of the United Kingdom that Labour can't win. It's been a long time in Scotland, Labour building back to a place where people can trust us again. The leadership of Keir Starmer and Anna Sarwar's got us to a place where people have put their trust in us.
Mr Sarwar claimed the result has profound implications for the whole of the UK.
In the last 2 years of my leadership, we have tried to get Scottish Labour back in the pitch, to give the people of Scotland a Labour Party worthy of the name. And what we can see is Scotland's going to lead the way in delivering a UK Labour government.
The SNP blamed the COVID rule-breaking of former MP Margaret Ferrier for the scale of the party's defeat.
Margaret Ferrier's behaviour throughout this entire process has been disgraceful. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There is no doubt that this backdrop for this by-election has been challenging for the SNP. I think the First Minister has acknowledged that from the outset. But look, I think you cannot transpose a result at a by-election with a very low turnout and transpose that to a general election.
The Conservatives' vote collapsed collapsed, with their candidate losing his deposit. But even though this was only a by-election, based on this result, Labour could win up to 40 seats in Scotland at the general election. John Craig, Sky News, Hamilton.
Well, I'm joined now from Hamilton by our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis, and here in the studio is our political correspondent Rob Powell. Morning to both of you. Conor, to you first of all, just how encouraged will Labour be by this result, and how much of a setback is it for the SNP there in Scotland?
I think this is a defining moment for Scottish politics, a defining moment for Scottish Labour, as both parties, the SNP and Labour, gear up for next year's general election. Why is this important and why does this matter? Well, context is key here. Let's remember, Labour here in Scotland have been in the doldrums of politics for very many years. They collapsed, their vote collapsed in the aftermath of the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, and for many, many years the party has had just one MP north of the border. So this major victory here in Hamilton last night, that 20% swing, is significant, and if we extrapolate that data, and again with all the usual caveats and cautions that go around projections, as John was alluding to in his report there, it could mean Labour here in Scotland winning more than 40 seats. That is a major moment. It is a hammer blow for the SNP, who have been gripped in terms of politics here in Scotland for very many years. Humza Yousaf reacting to this news overnight, saying it is a bitterly disappointing result. However, it has been a very trying time for the party over the last few months. It's at the centre of a police investigation examining its finances. It lost its long-running leader, the SNP leader Nicola Sturgeon, led to her arrest, her husband's arrest as well. And the big question will be, will this decline be resurrected and turned around for the SNP?
Yeah, and Rob, Labour do need to win seats in Scotland if they're going to hope to get Keir Starmer into number 10. So how encouraged do you think they will be by this result? Can they extrapolate too much?
Yeah, the path to power definitely runs through Scotland for Sir Keir Starmer. And I think sometimes on mornings like this, we say, well, actually, it looks good, but this indicates it might not be so good. I don't think that's the case this morning. I think this is unambiguously good news for Labour. And what we're really looking for in by-election results like this is the direction of travel and the sort of strength, the speed in which that travel is taking place, if you like. And what we can see from this is clearly that Labour are competitive again in Scotland, and I think that matters. What we don't know is necessarily where they're getting their votes from. The Tory vote did collapse there. So are these Tory voters switching to Labour, or is this a sort of more crucial, more important Yes voters, SNP independence voters going to Labour as well? And I guess it'd be interesting to see what Conor thought about that, because what is motivating people to actually switch to Labour? Is this just a protest vote, or do you think this is something broader going on in terms of the political forces realigning again, if you like, in Scotland?
Well, let's remember the SNP have clearly been in power here in Scotland, across in Edinburgh, for 16 years or so now. So it has that played a part in this, along with the SNP's police investigation and along with that change in leadership at the top of the SNP. Has the domestic track record of the SNP played into this? I think it's probably fair to say that has played a part. But let's remember, by-elections tend to be protest votes. You mentioned, and so did John, the collapse of the Tory vote here. They lost their deposit in this election. Highly embarrassing for them. The Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, part of Rishi Sunak's cabinet, has been out talking this morning, saying that is not surprising. And it was always a two-horse race between Labour and the SNP.
I think some of this is about mood and momentum, those sort of big unknowables of politics. And I think what this gives Labour going into their conference, remember, this weekend in Liverpool, is momentum. And also, I think, in a Scottish context, it sort of reminds me of what the Lib Dems say when they go on and win big seats and overturn big majorities, is that part of the key is getting in there and convincing people that other people are voting for them. I think a by-election result like this potentially convinces people in some of those target seats that Labour are eyeing in Scotland that actually Labour is competitive once again, and that maybe people more broadly are voting for Labour. And I think that is the big the big gain, the big win that Labour will be so heartened by this result.
Yeah, and we are talking to Labour a little bit later. We're talking to Pat Mcfadden just after 8 o'clock this morning. So interesting to see what they say about it. Conor Gill is there in Scotland. Thanks very much indeed. And thanks, Rob, to you as well. See you later. Let's take a look now at some of the other day's headlines. And Ukrainian officials say that 51 people have been killed by a Russian missile strike on a grocery store in Kharkiv. A 6-year-old boy is reported to be amongst the casualties. Ukraine's president accused Russia of genocidal aggression. A drone strike on a Syrian army college has killed at least 80 people. Hundreds were injured in the attack on a military graduation ceremony attended by young officers and their families in the city of Homs. Syria's military has accused insurgents backed by known international forces, but no group has claimed responsibility. 5 people have been charged with aggravated trespass after Just Stop Oil protesters disrupted a performance of Les Miserables in London's West End on Wednesday. The protesters stormed the stage and asked audience members to join the rebellion, a move which led to the show being abandoned. Sir Keir Starmer has ruled out reversing Rishi Sunak's decision to scrap the northern leg of HS2 should Labour get into government. The Prime Minister Rishi Sunak confirmed it would be scrapped this week during the Conservative Party conference. Elon Musk's £36 billion takeover of Twitter is under investigation by the United States market watchdog. The 52-year-old could be compelled to testify as part of the proceedings. Investigators are looking at whether Mr Musk broke security laws last year when he bought the social media platform. An investigation is underway after a fire broke out at Marco Simone Golf and Country Club yesterday, just days after the venue staged Europe's victory in the Ryder Cup. The fire began near the 18th green in the city's northeastern suburb of Gwydonia. Now, UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Agency, estimates that 43 million children were displaced by storms, floods and wildfires over the past 6 years. So let's get more on this now. Matthew Thompson is here with me. Morning, Matthew. This sounds like huge numbers involved here.
I mean, the figures are really striking. Essentially what UNICEF has done is it's looked at the number of displacements. That's essentially times children were forced to leave their homes between 2016 and 2021. And they found that effectively the equivalent of 20,000 children every single day over that period are being displaced from their homes. Now, that's a total, over that period of 6 years, of 43 million displacements. Now, they count displacements rather than children because actually in some of these places, children can be displaced more than once. So you might get a bit of double counting. But they're warning, and this is, I think, the alarming part, is that over the next 3 decades, because of the increase of climate change and these sorts of extreme weather events becoming more common, the total could soon be over 100 million children in that 30-year period. Now, 95% of the displacements they've counted over the 6 years, 95% are due to flooding. We've seen plenty of that in places like Greece and, of course, Libya just this year alone. But there's another significant proportion of the displacements are due to drought. Somalia has seen the brunt of that, a total of 1.3 million displacements because of drought. But also wildfires. We've seen those increase dramatically. Over 800,000 displacements in that 6-year period due to wildfires. Alarmingly, a third of those were in 2020 alone. So the fear is, as I say, as climate change becomes more entrenched, these weather events become more and more common, then there will be more displacements and, frankly, children tend to bear the brunt.
Sobering stuff. Matthew, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Well, let's turn now to an example of what that report from UNICEF is talking about. At least 40 people have died and more than 100 are missing after sudden rain flooded towns in northeastern India. Our international correspondent John Sparks has this report.
A raging torrent tears down a river in northeast India. Roads and bridges have been swept away. Local communities buried in sludge. The gates of a hydroelectric dam removed from their concrete foundations. Here, a local news reporter expresses his shock and surprise
Look at these homes completely submerged in mud.
The source of this deluge is a glacial lake more than 100 kilometres to the north. It burst its banks after heavy rains combined with meltwater produced by rising temperatures. And there were no warnings issued in advance. The authorities have managed to rescue 2,000 people, but more than 100 are missing. This is where I live, said one man. Everything's been filled up with water. As glaciers melt in mountainous regions, the risk of flash flooding has grown. This is the lake which has caused the destruction, called South Lonac. On the left, the lake is pictured before the breach. The following image reveals how much water has been released into the valley. The scientists have a term for this, glacial lake outburst flood, an increasingly common phenomenon.
We would probably expect, as temperatures continue to warm, we are going to get more of these because the lakes are getting bigger. We're getting more of these kind of mass movement events and so on. So I think really the priority is to get monitoring and kind of early warning systems in place.
The authorities are now trying to protect the people of this valley, with heavy rain expected over the next few days. John Sparks, Sky News.
Now we're going to be crossing to Jackie Bell-Trow for the sport shortly, but let's bring her in a bit earlier because you've got an important interview that you've done, Jackie, that you're going to tell us a bit about. Tell us who you talked to.
Yep, it is that time of year again. It's October, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and Elizabeth Hurley, who does great work every month, every year, has urged women to take control of their bodies and regularly self-check for signs of breast cancer. Inspired by her own family's experience, the Hollywood star has spent years campaigning for better awareness around the disease. Let's have a listen.
Certainly when I was growing up, breast cancer wasn't something that was talked about. And when my grandmother was diagnosed in the early 90s, she found her own lump and was mortified and embarrassed and didn't tell anybody, including her doctor, for way over a year, by which time it unfortunately had spread. And during her treatment and her diagnosis, we didn't know really anything about it, and I don't think she knew much about it either. So that's really why this campaign was started all those years ago, to try to make breast cancer not something that was whispered about, but something that was shouted about.
Even really young women. We hear lots about young women getting breast cancer now that perhaps we didn't before. I don't know why that is, but it's not just an old woman's disease, is it?
No, more and more younger women are being diagnosed with breast cancer. That for sure is a number on the rise, which could be for several reasons. One, a reason that scientists don't know yet, but two, it can be because they are being screened earlier and they are more breast aware.
What would your overall message be to people who are watching this?
Familiarise yourself with your own breasts. Be aware of any changes. Don't be afraid to go to the doctor if you feel there's something wrong. And as you say, be persistent if you really feel there's something wrong. And don't be scared to ask for help, but go quickly. Quickly. Speed is of the essence.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. How much pink do you have in your wardrobe?
Oh, Jackie, I have a lot of pink. I've been doing this for 28 years, and around that time, Evelyn Lauder decided to invent a ribbon to represent breast cancer around the world. And she was inspired by the AIDS activists who, at that time in the early 90s, had a red ribbon to educate everybody about AIDS. And she thought we should have a ribbon, co-created the ribbon with a lady called Alexandra Penny, who was the editor of Self magazine. And they decided to make it pink because they said pink was a colour that every woman could wear in a certain shade and that it was out there and would really make people remember the campaign, which at that time was mostly about awareness. So the pink ribbon was born. My pink wardrobe started to grow, and I would say today probably 25% of my wardrobe is pink. And I love it. I wear pink all year round, but I always think of the pink ribbon and Evelyn every time I put something pink on.
Such an important message there from Elizabeth Hurley, Jackie, and a message that's very dear to your heart, of course.
Well, yes, as a stage 4 breast cancer, I don't want to say battler, but someone who's got breast cancer all the time and deals with it, I just think, you know, come on, everyone's got to check, because the earlier you get it, as Elizabeth said, the better it is. No one's really got time for it. No woman's got time for it, but it's just one of those things. If you find something, you've got to go. And there was a lovely message on Twitter the other day from a lady who is in the police force, and she said, I saw a tweet from Sky Jackie a year ago asking me to check. I did check, I found a lump, it saved my life because it was cancer and I've been through the whole treatment process. But I would never have found it unless I'd seen that tweet. And I think the more people talk about it in October, maybe it will prompt more women to have a check. And you never know, it just, you know, it could save your life.
Yeah, and one of those things, Jackie, that we just shouldn't be squeamish to talk about.
I know, and it's hard to believe, isn't it? It's the 90s. People didn't talk about it. Nobody would talk about breast health. It was super embarrassing. Like Elizabeth said, her grandmother was so just excruciatingly embarrassed to go to the doctor with a lump. And by the time she did, it was too late. It had spread, and she died. And you know, that's the bottom line with breast cancer. If you give it a free rein, it will do what it does, and you need to sort of catch it early. And 31 women die every day from this disease. It's still the most common cancer in this country, but it's also very treatable. And between 85 and 90% of women who get breast cancer will survive for 5 years or more. So if you find it and get treated, more often than not, you will be absolutely fine. But it is not always curable, and people are still dying from it. And that's why it's important to have this conversation every year. People can still fundraise and put money into research, and one day, nobody will die from it.
Yeah, really important message there. Jackie, while we've got you on a completely different subject, tell us a bit about Kevin Kegan.
I know this is a complete gear change, isn't it? But the former England and Newcastle manager Kevin Kegan has been criticised for his comments on female pundits. This is what he said: I don't like to listen to ladies talking about the England men's team at the match because I don't think it's the same experience. I have a problem with that. But if I see an England lady footballer saying about England against Scotland at Wembley, and she's saying, if I would have been in that position, I would have done this, I don't think it's quite the same. I don't think it crosses over that much. Women in Football, an organisation dedicated to advancing women's ambitions within the game, had this to say: Kevin Kegan seems to be advocating a kind of gender apartheid in football, whereby the men's game can only be discussed by men and ladies, in inverted commas, are banished to a separate room. Kegan and people of a similar mindset have a moral obligation to keep their opinions to themselves rather than add weight to the narrative that enables online abuse and threats of violence every day simply for doing their job. And former footballer Joe Barton has come out in support of his ex-manager, posting Kevin Kegan, Ballon d'Or winner, 1978, England manager. He's bang on.
Jackie, thanks very much indeed. We'll have more from you and the rest of the sport a little bit later on. But right now, let's go back to our top story. And Labour has won the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election, taking the seat from the SNP by an overwhelming majority. It was a difficult night for the Scottish Conservatives. Their candidate, Thomas Kerr, lost his deposit. Well, let's talk now to the Minister for Rail, Huw Merriman, who joins me now for the government. A very good morning to you, Huw Merriman. Thanks for talking to us. So, huge win for Labour in this by-election with a swing of 20%, 20.4% from the SNP. The Tories lost their deposit. Just how disappointing is that for you?
Well, obviously, the challenger was the Labour Party, Labour candidate. Labour held this seat in 2017, lost it to the SNP in 2019. So they've won it back, and there's widespread dissatisfaction with the SNP Scottish Government. So it's no surprise to see all of those that disagree with the SNP crowding around one particular candidate, and that candidate has succeeded. So that's how by-elections work. We know that. We see it all the time.
Also, Keir Starmer has called it a seismic moment. Success in Scotland gives him a much better chance of getting into Downing Street, doesn't it? This bodes well for him, doesn't it?
Well, I think we just need to put it into context. That's his second MP, and they used to have a lot more in 2017. So that's a matter for him to comment. He's succeeded. You tend to see in by-elections all of those that are opposed to the governing party, and that's the SNP, who are clearly very unpopular, crowding around the party most likely to succeed, and that's occurred, and that's by-elections for you. We see it all the time.
Does it give you some cause for concern, though, come a general election?
Look, our focus is on governing for the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's why you saw the Prime Minister set out his pitch in terms of change and reform, and that's what we'll be focusing on. By-election results, are always of interest, of course, and we focus on every single vote, but what we're really focused on is winning the next general election and governing right now so that we've got that platform to demonstrate to the people in the United Kingdom that they should vote Conservative when it comes to a general election, rather than focusing on just individual by-elections.
OK, well, let's talk about that pitch. The Prime Minister announced on Wednesday that he was scrapping the Manchester leg of HS2, putting the money into other local projects. Part of what was announced was that the bit that does survive of HS2 will travel into London Euston. But we now hear that that'll only happen if there's enough private finance secured for the project. Can you confirm that that's the case?
So the Prime Minister was completely clear that we need to do this differently, not have HS2 run it, have a development corporation set up. These are the types of models that have delivered Canary Wharf by private finance and all the transport infrastructure that comes. So most recently in London, in Nine Elms and Battersea Power Station, where again there's a station funded off the back of £9 billion worth of investment. So that's the model that we're looking at. So it means the private sector taking that lead. We believe they're best placed to deliver on what's actually the largest public sector land deal left in London. It's a huge opportunity to build offices, see businesses grow, and up to 10,000 homes. So it should be a private sector-led deal because it's the type of land like the one I'm standing behind me in Leeds, where you'd expect the private sector to be able to deliver. And then off the back of that, we get our transport infrastructure.
So has any of the private investment required for the Euston leg been secured yet?
Well, we've always had a partner in Lendlease who are absolutely expert in this. They don't just master plan and deliver sites like the one we're talking about in Euston, but they also invest in it as well. So that provides the platform for us to get that investment through. And it's the type of thing that the private sector does across this country. So previously we've had a railway focus. We don't think that's the best way to deliver what is effectively a big private sector land deal, which is going to be all about homes and offices and businesses, as well as the station. So it's a new way of looking at it, but I'm absolutely determined that we will get that delivered. London delivers these types of projects, as does other parts of the country. You just look around London, you look at Canary Wharf, you look at Nine Elms, you look at Battersea Power Station, it's all done by the private sector. There is no reason why this can't be done, and I'm committed to ensuring it is done.
Apologies for rushing you. I know that we don't have a huge amount of time. So we're dependent on waiting to see whether we'll get investment, to see if that leg will be properly secured. In the meantime, there are also questions over the new Network North's transport project. You promised to open the Leamside line in Northumberland in the documents published on Wednesday. Now, the reference to that line appears to be gone. So are you reopening that line or not?
So with pots of money, so £1.75 billion has been allocated to the North East region for their city transport deal. It's for them to determine how they wish to spend it. We have suggestions and have made suggestions how regions could spend, but it's also right that we actually listen and talk to the region about where they want to allocate that money. So Leamside line would be a very popular choice, but we do actually want them to make the ultimate decision. So that's where the clarification goes. We have funded Ferry Hill Station, so that's a good start. But the money's there for the region. It's down to them how they wish to fund it. And so that's where that clarification has been made.
So promises now seem to be becoming suggestions. Rishi Sunak's slogan was long decisions for a brighter future. But can investors trust that you'll stick to those long-term decisions?
Let me give you an example of that. Look, I'm here in Leeds at the moment, and yesterday I spent the entire day in Bradford. £2 billion has been allocated for a new station for Bradford. They're absolutely delighted with that. That wasn't able to be funded under the HS2 model because money was just being ploughed into that project. But they have two options. I spent the afternoon with them in their board meeting. for us to work out which option is the better one. It's right that we work with our local authority partners because it's their, in this instance, city. It's for them to work with us and decide what the best model is, because it's not just transport for them. That's regeneration. That's something they've long cherished and wanted. Now that ambition will be realised. So I'm determined to sit down, work with our local authority partners, with business, to make sure we can deliver this package. The Prime Minister set it out and we will get it delivered.
OK, Huw Merriman, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you so much.
Let's take a look now what the weather's up to.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will bring unseasonably warm conditions, especially to the southeast, whereas heavy rain will affect Scotland. Ireland, Northern Ireland and central Britain will be rather dull this morning, with outbreaks of rain, heavy in places. Fog will affect some coasts and hills too. Elsewhere, it'll be mainly dry with plenty of sunshine, and it'll be warmer than yesterday, but rather blustery, with northern Scotland and Irish Sea coastal areas at risk of gales. The afternoon will see rain edging across more of the north, whereas Ireland will turn brighter and drier in the south.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the Princess of Wales has swapped the pantsuit for the tracksuit this week during a sports day in East Yorkshire, where she also got a little surprise from a young player. Princess Catherine was playing indoor rugby during a trip to Hull when one of her teammates gave her a jump from behind. She joined Disability Rugby League's players for a session of wheelchair rugby too. Do stay with us. Coming up here on Sky News Breakfast, we'll see how one photographer is getting people to view Notting Hill Carnival differently with some compelling shots. Also, the miraculous rescue of this turtle found dehydrated on the shores of Scotland. Hello, welcome back. So Sir Keir Starmer is claiming what he calls a seismic win over the SNP in Scotland. The vote was triggered after the incumbent Margaret Ferrier was suspended from Parliament for breaching COVID rules in 2020. So let's take a closer look again at the results. And Scottish Labour's Michael Shanks won with 17,845 votes. That's more than double the SNP with 8,399. And the Scottish Conservatives lost their deposit with just 1,192 votes. Labour received 58.6% of the vote. That's well ahead of the SNP on 27.6%. The Conservatives took just 3.9%. And we can compare those results with the last election in 2019. The Labour vote was up 24.1% this time round. The SNP share of the vote fell by more than 16%. So let's bring in Conor Gillis, who's in Hamilton for us this morning once again. So, Conor, presumably there'll be celebrations there for Labour this morning.
Yeah, let's remember, Scottish Labour here north of the border have been in the weeds of politics for a great many years. One MP north of the border, a hammering in the aftermath of the Scottish independence referendum. And this morning, they are waking up to a doubling in their numbers, 2 MPs north of the border. Why is this important? Well, clearly, Sir Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have been clear that any path to 10 Downing Street needs to run through this part of the world here in central Scotland. And the experts have been crunching the numbers overnight. Michael Thrasher coming up with some predictions. Clearly there needs to be some caution and caveat around that. But let's take a look at what this result, the 20% swing right here in this part of the world, could mean for an election coming round the corner potentially next year. So let's look. 2019 result, the SNP had 48 seats. As I mentioned, Scottish Labour 1 seat. The Conservatives 6 seats. The Liberal Democrats 4 seats. Now, let's look at this projection. Scottish Labour could be on course for 42 seats. The SNP, that drastic and dramatic decline in their fortunes, down to just 6, on par with the Conservatives, and just behind them with potentially 5 seats is the Liberal Democrats. This is a massive moment for Scottish politics. It is a huge moment for the SNP, who have had a very tricky couple of months. They are at the centre of a live police investigation examining the party's finances. It lost its leader, Nicola Sturgeon, the long-serving leader, more than 3,000 days in the job. She quit suddenly earlier on this year. She then found herself being arrested by those police officers, her husband arrested, both of them later released without charge pending further investigation. Why has the SNP lost this? Well, there are many suggestions. The police part being one element here, but clearly this is a party who have been in power north of the border for more than 16 years. Is there fatigue in their domestic strategy? And how will that play into the independent strategy wider as well? Labour will capitalise on this, saying that it shows that Scottish independent support is dwindling and the conversation is moving on. Clearly something that the SNP will reject. Let's take a look at what Humza Yousaf, the First Minister here in Scotland, has been saying. He's reacting. He posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, saying a disappointing night for the SNP. I want to thank our exceptional candidate Katie Loudon and our activists for their incredible efforts. He also then goes on to say, let me also congratulate Michael Shanks on being elected. The circumstances of this by-election were always very difficult for us. So that is what the Humza Yousaf, the First Minister, is saying publicly now. Privately, the SNP have been trying to suggest they were on course to win this. The big question now is this the beginning of a decline in the SNP's electoral fortunes after such a grip on politics north of the border for so many years? Is this a sign of things to come? And can the party turn those fortunes around? Or is this just a blip on the road?
Yeah, lots of really interesting questions there, some of which we'll put to Labour later, just after 8 o'clock this morning, and we hope to talk to the SNP in the programme as well. But Conor, for the moment, thanks very much indeed. Now then, let's go back to Jackie, who's standing by with all the sports news now. Jackie, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed. My favourite story this morning is right at the end, and it's gymnastics, but we start with football. And summer signing Ryan Gravenberch scored his first goal for Liverpool as they beat Union Saint-Gilloise in the Europa League last night. Gravenberch scored just before half-time with this. He was pleased. The Belgian side applied late pressure, but Liverpool secured the win when Diogo Jota scored in the second minute of added time. West Ham made it 2 wins from 2 and topped their Europa League group after they beat SC Freiburg 2-1. West Ham took an early lead through Lucas Paqueta before Roland Salai equalised for Freiburg after half-time. Nayef Aguirre scored the winning goal for West Ham with just over 20 minutes to go, and it means the Hammers top Group A. Brighton came from 2 goals down to draw 2-2 in Marseille. They conceded 2 goals in the space of 90 seconds as Chancel Mbemba and Jordan Veretout put Marseille ahead. Roberto De Zerbi's side pulled a goal back through Pascal Gross before they were awarded a penalty, which João Pedro then scored to level things up. In the Europa Conference League, Aston Villa picked up all 3 points with a 1-0 win against the Bosnian side Zrinjski Mostar. Midfielder John McGinn scored in the 4th minute of added time to secure his side's first ever win in the competition. Bojan Miovski earned Aberdeen's first European point in almost 16 years with a late equaliser against HJK Helsinki. Let's move on to cricket. It was the worst possible start for England's defence of their World Cup title, thrashed by 9 wickets by New Zealand in Ahmedabad, the team they narrowly beat in the final of the World Cup 4 years ago. New Zealand was set a target of 283, and things looked promising for England when Sam Curran struck with his first ball to remove Will Young. But a second wicket partnership between Devon Conway and Rachin Ravindra brought New Zealand up to 100 at the start of the 13th over. Both Conway and Ravindra hit stunning centuries, Conway ending 152 not out, and Ravindra was unbeaten on 123 as the pair combined for a sensational 273-run partnership. It is the 4th highest in men's World Cup history. And finally, well done to Ilya Kovtun of Ukraine, who last night got the overall silver medal at the Gymnastics World Championships. I think we've got a picture of him behind Hashimoto, the champion. Why is the silver so special? Because the Ukrainian sports team are training in exile in Croatia, away from family, of course, against the backdrop of war. Great effort from him. He said afterwards, it's very special. It's all sport.
Jackie, thanks so much. See you again a little bit later. I just want to tell you now about a photographer who's encouraging people to view Notting Hill Carnival differently from how she believes that it's often portrayed in the media. Ria Blake has been snapping carnival goers and the celebrations since she received her first camera more than 8 years ago. And she says the carnival can often be portrayed awfully, she says, in the media. And with these snaps, she hopes that her work can reframe the festival in a more positive light. They are some stunning pictures there, aren't they? You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Still to come, the miraculous rescue of this turtle found dehydrated and 1,000 miles from home on a beach in Scotland.
And now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded.
This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms, I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with her, aren't I?
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
The pound has rallied, moderation, interest rates peaking.
I'm up at 6%.
The highest for 14 years.
Will that be the peak? Will it be a little bit lower?
It's closer to a potential crash.
So many words, so many meanings. But what do they mean for you and your finances? Stay up to date on Sky News.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Now, it's the Wiltshire Brewery, dismantled and rebuilt brick by brick in Pyongyang. The Taedonggang beer factory, which originally operated in Trowbridge, was named one of North Korea's top businesses. Alice Porter went along to the site where it once stood.
It's the biggest beer in the world's most secretive state. North Korea considers the Taedonggang beer one of its top 10 companies. But it originated more than 5,000 miles away in the West Country town of Trowbridge. Usher's was a landmark brewery in the area, but when it fell on hard times, an unusual offer was made to buy the company for £1.5 million.
So these are some of the artefacts from our sort of Usher's collection that we've got on display. It really is the oddest story, and Usher's was closing down in 2000, and at that time North Korea was looking to build its or open its first brewery, and the two events coincided.
Once the North Korean government had purchased Usher's brewery, they dismantled the property and shipped it piece by piece to Pyongyang for it to be rebuilt. And North Koreans came here to Trowbridge to learn exactly how to make Usher's beer. But the brewery was 12 acres in size with enormous equipment. Getting it to North Korea was a challenge.
The fermenters were so big that you had to take down lamp posts and things like that to get them around the corners. And, it was quite an impressive do.
For the last 21 years, the newly named Taedonggang beer factory has been a bastion of brewing. Built under Kim Jong-il, his son has become an enthusiastic supporter. Simon Cockrell leads tours to North Korea, including to the famous brewery.
This is a fairly standard thing to do. If you were to, do a deep dive into North Korean factories and plants, you'd probably find almost all of them were made up of components imported.
North Korean propaganda makes no mention of the origins of their famous beer, but it's clear that this Wiltshire brewery has a surprisingly international legacy. Alice Porter, Sky News.
Well, let's turn now to the incredible tale of how a malnourished and dehydrated turtle was rescued. Iona, the turtle, is named after the Hebridean island on which she washed up. Scientists at the Sea Life Centre in North Yorkshire said she was lucky to be found and that it would be touch and go whether she would survive. But now she's fit and healthy and has been released back into the wild. She was found in January last year and she was sent on to Scarborough Sea Life Centre to begin her rehabilitation. Then, almost 2 years later, she's been set free back into the wild off the Azores in Portugal, completing a 4,000-mile journey. So let's find out a little bit more about Iona. Joining me now is Dan Jarvis, who's a Conservation Area Coordinator at the British Divers Marine Life Rescue and was part of the team that rescued Iona the turtle. So very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. So tell us a little bit more about Iona then. How did she first come to the attention of rescuers?
We originally received a report from a member of the public on our hotline who had found Iona on the island of Iona, which is just off the Isle of Mull. So we were able to provide advice to the member of the public there, as we have no volunteers on such a small island, but we do on Mull. So they were able to bring the turtle across on the ferry, and it was relayed then up to Mull Aquarium.
And how do you think she ended up in Iona? Presumably you don't have many turtles ending up there. How did she end up in somewhere so far away from her normal route?
Well, they're a tropical species, of course. They live down around the Caribbean, much farther south than the UK, of course. What seems to happen every now and again is that turtles do get washed or blown off course by Atlantic storms, and they end up coming into the Gulf Stream, which pushes them further north up towards Northern Europe, the UK and Ireland, for instance, where they become weak and hypothermic because our water temperature isn't warm enough to support them. So they end up malnourished, dehydrated and cold-stunned. And often, unfortunately, a lot of them are found dead, but a few of them are found alive, and such as Iona here, can undergo rehabilitation and get released back out to the wild again.
Well, yeah, and how delicate a process is that rehabilitation? You know, if she is hypothermic, for example, or malnourished, how difficult is it to revive a turtle?
It's really hard to rehabilitate turtles. You need to very, very carefully and gradually increase the temperature. You can't just heat them up immediately to make them warm and solve the cold stunning problem. So it's a really gradual process, and the early days really are touch and go as to whether they're going to make it or not. Sadly, a number of them that do go into rehab don't make it through. So any success and every success is a really massive achievement. So it's really fantastic that Iona's managed to make it so far and get back out to the wild where she should be.
Well, yeah, and how does it feel to know that she's back out in the wild, living like she should be again? How does that feel?
Yeah, just brilliant. It's great. You know, any animal that we're able to return to the wild after rehabilitation, whether that be turtles or seals that were more common used to dealing with, it's really great. So for Iona now, and hopefully she's going to do really well out there. That's the best we can hope for now, really.
Your line went a bit dodgy there for a minute. It sounded like you'd gone underwater with her for a moment there, Dan, but we'll stick with it and hope that it restores itself to its full health. And was it hard to see her go? You must become attached as rescuers to animals like this.
Yeah, especially special animals like this. It's really exciting to see them go. So getting Iona and seeing her go back out into the wild is just magic, really.
How confident are you that she'll adapt straight back to those conditions in the wild, having been in captivity essentially for some months?
Well, a lot of the turtles that are rehabilitated are fitted with a satellite tag, so it means that they can be tracked to see what habitats they're using, how much they're diving, and how that compares with other turtles that have never been through rehabilitation. And the results of that are really positive. These turtles seem to cope with being back in the wild quite quickly. They adapt to being back into sort of the sea conditions quite well. So we've got high hopes that Iona is just going to sort of follow suit and continue to do well.
Oh, that's lovely. The thought that you might be able to track her down again sometime in the future. Certainly keep an eye on what she's doing. OK, well, Dan Jarvis, we're out of time. Really lovely to hear such a positive story, and congratulations on rehabilitating Iona so successfully and seeing her back into the wild. Thanks so much. Lovely story. Let's take a look now at what the weather's doing.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will bring unseasonably warm conditions, especially to the southeast, whereas heavy rain will affect Scotland. Ireland, Northern Ireland and central Britain will be rather dull this morning, with outbreaks of rain, heavy in places. Fog will affect some coasts and hills too. Elsewhere, it'll be mainly dry with plenty of sunshine, and it'll be warmer than yesterday, but rather blustery, with northern Scotland and Irish sea coastal areas at risk of gales. The afternoon will see rain edging across more of the north, whereas Ireland will turn drier and brighter in the south, and the wind will ease from the west too. Scotland will see rain becoming prolonged overnight while turning heavy in the west. Elsewhere, it'll be largely dry with some low cloud forming in places. And Saturday will be mostly fine and warm, perhaps very warm in southeast England, but Scotland looks rather cool and wet. Higher ground there can expect over 100 millimetres of rain, that's around 4 inches, with some localised flooding possible. And Sunday will be even warmer, with rain becoming confined to the far north, but very healthy temperatures down south.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
On Sky News Breakfast, Labour takes Rutherglen and Hamilton West from the SNP overnight. We'll have all the latest on that by-election. Hello everyone, it's 8 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Sir Keir Starmer hails Labour's victory over the SNP in Rutherglen and Hamilton West as a seismic moment. It's Friday, the 6th of October.
Michael Shanks, Scottish Labour Party, 17,840.
It's the first time that Labour has ever won a seat from the SNP in a by-election, and they did it with a swing of more than 20%. Also ahead, 43 million children forced to abandon their homes and schools because of storms, floods and wildfires in the past 6 years. 5 charged after Just Stop Oil protesters disrupt Les Miserables.
Also ahead, Elizabeth Hurley tells me why it's so important for women to take control of their bodies and regularly check for signs of breast cancer.
Be persistent if you really feel there's something wrong, and don't be scared to ask for help, but go quickly. Quickly. Speed is of the essence.
And after a week of VAR controversy, Liverpool returned to action with a 2-0 win in the Europa League.
Hello, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us. Sir Keir Starmer is claiming what he calls a seismic win over the SNP in Scotland. A swing of more than 20% to Labour saw candidate Michael Shanks take Rutherglen and Hamilton West, the first time they've ever won a seat at a by-election from the Nationalists. Well, the vote was triggered after incumbent Margaret Ferrier was suspended from Parliament for breaching COVID rules in 2020. So let's take a closer look at the results. And Scottish Labour's Michael Shanks won with 17,845 votes. That's more than double the SNP with 8,399. And the Scottish Conservatives lost their deposit with just 1,192 votes. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, reports.
A jubilant welcome for Labour's newest MP, Michael Shanks, as he arrived at the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election count with the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar. The result was never in doubt on the night. The only issue was whether Labour's victory would be big enough to provide a springboard for major gains from the SNP for Sir Keir Starmer at the general election.
Michael Shanks, Scottish Labour Party, 17,840.
Minutes later came confirmation that Mr Shanks had overturned an SNP majority of more than 5,000 into a Labour majority approaching 10,000, with a massive swing of more than 20%.
And I declare that Michael Shanks is elected to serve in the United Kingdom Parliament as a member for Rutherglen and Hamilton West constituency.
Mr Shanks claimed the Labour Party is on the way back.
There's absolutely no doubt that this result shows that there's no part of the United Kingdom that Labour can't win. It's been a long time in Scotland, Labour building back to a place where people can trust us again. The leadership of Keir Starmer and Anna Sarwar's got us to a place where people have put their trust in us.
Mr Sarwar claimed the result has profound implications for the whole of the UK.
In the last 2 years of my leadership, we have tried to get Scottish Labour back in the pitch, to give the people of Scotland a Labour Party worthy of the name. And what we can see is Scotland's going to lead the way in delivering a UK Labour government.
The SNP blamed the COVID rule breaking of former MP Margaret Ferrier for the scale of the party's defeat.
Margaret Ferrier's behaviour throughout this entire process has been disgraceful. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There is no doubt that this backdrop for this by-election has been challenging for the SNP. I think the First Minister has acknowledged that from the outset. But look, I think you cannot transpose a result at a by-election with a variable turnout and transpose that to a general election.
The Conservatives' vote collapsed, with their candidate losing his deposit. But even though this was only a by-election, based on this result, Labour could win up to 40 seats in Scotland at the general election. John Craig, Sky News, Hamilton.
Well, let's cross live now to Conor Gillis, who's in Hamilton for us this morning. Morning to you, Conor. Just how encouraged, then, will Labour be by this result in Scotland, and how much of a setback is it for the SNP?
Yeah, good morning, Anna. This is a defining moment. There is no doubt about that in the path towards the general election. Labour here in this part of central Scotland, a spring in their step this morning because they have doubled their numbers in terms of their MP footprint. North of the border, went from 1 MP after a catastrophic collapse in their result following the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, doubling those numbers to 2 last night with the victory here in Rutherglen and Hamilton West. A 20% swing from the SNP, a major moment, and with all the usual caveats and caution around projections of how this may look in the forthcoming general election. Let's take a look at what it could look like according to some projections that we have here at Sky News. In 2019, let's remember, the SNP had 48 votes north of the border. Labour, as I said, 1 vote. Well, that could turn around. 42 seats, potentially, the projection in the next general election for Labour. The SNP dropping down dramatically to 6, on par with the Conservatives, and not far behind that, Scottish Labour. Let's look at that in terms of how it would look on the map. Well, in 2019 it was a sea of yellow and triumph for the SNP. Well, it looks a very different and miserable picture from the nationalist perspective if this projection result is to be expected. A sea of red, and that will be exactly what Keir Starmer is looking forward to when he arrives in this part of the world later on this morning. The SNP are really disappointed about this. They've had a tough time over the last couple of months when it comes to that police investigation examining their finances, the arrest of Nicola Sturgeon and her husband, and their later release. The question will be, is this the beginning of things changing, the SNP's grip on Scottish politics changing? And the question is, can they turn that around in next year's general election?
OK, Conor, yes, and it'd be interesting to get Labour's reaction. We will be talking to Pat Mcfadden in just a few minutes' time. Conor Gillis, for the moment, though, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other headlines now. And Ukrainian officials say that 51 people have been killed by a Russian missile strike on a grocery store in Kharkiv. A 6-year-old boy is reported to be amongst the casualties. Ukraine's president accused Russia of genocidal aggression. A drone strike on a Syrian army college has killed at least 80 people. Hundreds were injured in the attack on a military graduation ceremony attended by young officers and their families in the city of Homs. Syria's military has accused insurgents backed by known international forces, but no group has claimed responsibility. 5 people have been charged with aggravated trespass after Just Stop Oil protesters disrupted a performance of Les Miserables in London's West End on Wednesday. The protesters stormed the stage and asked audience members to join the rebellion, a move which led to the show being abandoned. So Keir Starmer has ruled out reversing Rishi Sunak's decision to scrap the northern leg of HS2 should Labour get into government. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, confirmed it would be scrapped this week during the Conservative Party conference. An investigation is underway after a fire broke out at the Marco Simoni Golf and Country Club yesterday, just days after the venue staged Europe's victory in the Ryder Cup. The fire began near the 18th green in the city's northeastern suburb of Guidonia. Now, UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Agency, estimates that 43 million children were displaced by storms, floods and wildfires over the past 6 years. So let's bring in Matthew Thompson. Morning, Matthew. Really stark figures, these. So tell us more.
I mean, they're alarming. There's no two ways about it. Essentially what UNICEF has done is they've looked at the number of child displacements. That's effectively the number of times that children were forced to flee their homes due to natural disasters over a 6-year period from 2016 up to 2021. And as I say, the findings are stark. What they've effectively found is that over that time period, the equivalent of 20,000 children every single day were forced to flee their homes as a result of natural disasters. Now, over that 6-year period, that's a total of 43 million displacements. They count displacements rather than children, because some children, amazingly, can be displaced more than once, if you can even imagine. So sometimes there could be double counting. So it's 43 million displacements. But then, almost more worryingly, what they're saying is over the next 30 years, because of the increase of climate change and more natural disasters, up to 100 million children could be displaced over that time period. Now, 95% of the people displaced in the 6 years they looked at were as a result of floods, the ones you're seeing on screen now. We've seen in Libya, for example, this year, in places like Greece as well. Other major factors were drought. Somalia was a major country affected by that. 1.3 million of the displacements were due to drought. And then also there's a rise in wildfires. We've, of course, seen wildfires roll right across the world over the last couple of years. Over 800,000 displacements due to wildfires. But alarmingly, a third of those were in 2020 alone. And as I say, the fear is that as climate change becomes more entrenched, these extreme weather events become more common, more children will be displaced, and there are, well, major wake-up calls being made by UNICEF today that we need to do something about this.
Yeah, really sobering stuff. Matthew, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Let's take a quick look at what's making the front pages of this morning's papers. And the Daily Mail leads with guilty verdicts in the cases of 2 nursing staff accused of mistreating patients in a stroke hospital unit. The Telegraph quotes Keir Starmer, insisting he's not in a position to reverse the Prime Minister's decision to scale back the northern leg of HS2. The Times leads with a consultation by the Crown Prosecution Service, which has led to a recommendation for leniency in cases of so-called mercy killings. And The Sun reports that a man has been arrested for allegedly plotting to kidnap the TV presenter Holly Willoughby. And Essex police have just confirmed that a 36-year-old man is in custody after being arrested on Wednesday on suspicion of conspiracy to kidnap. An investigation is ongoing in that case. So those papers came out before the results of the Rutherglen by-election. Let's get more on Labour's victory in that by-election. The swing from the SNP was much bigger than Labour had publicly been anticipating. So let's talk about it with Labour's National Campaign Coordinator, Pat Mcfadden, who joins me now. Morning to you. Just how important a win do you consider this to be?
It's a really important by-election win. This is more important than a normal by-election win for an opposition because it's such a big signal of a desire for change in Scotland, where the SNP have been in power for 16 years now. I'm just back from the doorsteps in Rutherglen. Actually, I was there yesterday and the day before campaigning in the by-election, and you could really feel a difference in the mood compared to a few years ago, and it's a big signal of change. And I think that this result could have reverberations not only in Scotland but right throughout the UK. OK,
so that's interesting that you think it is significant. And we're always told that we shouldn't extrapolate too much from one by-election result, but do indulge me because we're always tempted to do that. Because if this swing that you achieved in this by-election was replicated at a general election, it would give Labour 42 seats in Scotland. So is that what you're aiming for in the general election? We know we've got a lot of work to do. It's always been the case that to achieve a parliamentary majority across the UK, that was going to be much more difficult if we didn't recover our position in Scotland, where we went into this by-election with only one MP. So if we can gain more seats in Scotland, it brings the prospect of a Labour government that much closer. We're conscious that we've still got a lot to do. We've got a lot of work to do between now and the next election. We've got our conference starting in Liverpool this weekend, where we'll be setting out more about the kind of change that we want to bring, so that that mood, that desire for change that you saw expressed in Rutherglen and Hamilton West in the by-election can be felt and answered right across the country. You say you think it signifies a significant shift in mood in Scotland, and yet some people will say this by-election was peculiar in that the outgoing MP, Margaret Ferrier, was basically... She was found guilty of breaching COVID regulations, and the constituents, 12,000 of them, signed a recall petition against her. The party's partly being punished for that, isn't it? Well, it's a mood for change, you know, in every by-election there are particular circumstances, and I don't
say we don't still have a lot of work to do. We do. We had a fantastic result last night. I think it's a big signal, but we know we've got more to do, and that's why we approach this conference with a combination of confidence in our ideas and our plans, but also conscious of the size of the task. And that's the tone that we will set next week in Liverpool. That's what you'll hear from Keir Starmer when he speaks next week, from Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, and from the other leading Labour politicians who will be setting out our stall at the conference over the next few days.
Well, and interesting, your candidate in that seat, Michael Shanks, who's just won overnight, contradicted Keir Starmer on a number of issues, on gender reform, on the 2-child benefit cap and on the bedroom tax during the campaign. Is that the way to success in Scotland, allowing your candidates to stray from the party line?
I thought he was a wonderful candidate. I was very happy to campaign for Michael Shanks. I think he's going to be a great MP. Look, people will have their views, but we are absolutely united on wanting to do more on child poverty, more to fix and renew the NHS, and more for economic growth to improve people's living standards. Michael's signature policy in that by-election was to make work pay. That's a UK-wide commitment to make sure that people at work enjoy decent pay, decent conditions. We're the Labour Party. The clue's in the name, so we'll go into this election. I believe, I've been around politics for a long, long time. I think we will go into the next general election as a more united force than we have been for a generation.
Now, let me talk about HS2 if I can, because Labour said before the announcement that the government was going to scrap the Manchester leg that they wanted to see it build. So why is Keir Starmer now saying that you won't reverse the government's plans to abandon that leg?
Well, it's a Tory fiasco, this. They've had 13 years and the costs have tripled. We did want to see the line built.
So why not commit to
this whole thing
then?
began when we were in government, the initial announcements of HS2. But once the government has announced the cancellation of the project, if they start selling off land, if they reallocate resources that were for HS2 to other rail projects, then we have to take those circumstances into account. There's an important point here, and not just for HS2, but for other things too. If you're an opposition party and you're coming up to a general election, you have to take the world that you inherit and build from there. You can't take the world that you wished to inherit. So if, as a result of the Prime Minister's announcement at his conference this week, money's reallocated, land is used for different purposes, it's not as simple in a year's time or whenever the election comes as just pressing a rewind button to this week. And that's really important for your viewers and the public to understand in terms of the approach that we will take.
OK, and the Prime Minister said that the East-West links were far more important. They said new information had come to light than those linking North and South. Has he got a point? Do you agree with that?
Well, the thing about the other projects that he's announced is many of them have been re-announced before. This Northern Powerhouse Rail that he
But do you like the
announced
general idea of improving
like the
those
idea
things?
of that. We're committed to doing that, but it's been in the last 3 Conservative manifestos. And another lesson that has to be learned from the HS2 fiasco is that with major infrastructure projects, you have to have a plan for delivery as well as a plan for announcement. And I think people would be forgiven for being sceptical, if not cynical, about the Prime Minister announcing a series of projects which have been in the last 3 Tory manifestos. All these road upgrades, they've been announced over and over and over again. What the country needs is a long-term plan for delivery, not just announcements.
OK.
And that's the approach that we need to take.
I have to let you go, but one quick question. The Guardian is reporting today that key figures from Tony Blair's 1997 election campaign, you'll remember it, which are saying that Keir Starmer needs to set out a clearer policy platform. They're saying that Labour needs to be bolder and clearer. What do you say to that?
I think we should always learn from our past moments of victory. There haven't been enough in Labour's history. And the big lesson I take from past moments of victory is reach beyond your own base and always be talking about tomorrow and not yesterday and plans for the future. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Even though we're not always clear on what the plans are.
We have got some great plans. We've got a great plan for dentistry today, 700,000 new appointments, tackling children's tooth decay. That's the kind of policy that will address what people want to hear, and you'll hear more of it over the next few days.
OK, Pat Mcfadden, thanks very much indeed for coming in. Thank you. Let's just update you on a developing story this morning. Police have confirmed a 36-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to kidnap as part of an ongoing investigation. It's believed his intended target was This Morning presenter Holly Willoughby. The man from Harlow remains in custody after an arrest on Wednesday. Now then, we're going to be seeing a lot of Jackie this hour, I'm very pleased to say, not just with the sport, but Jackie, you've also done an important interview that you're going to tell us about now, haven't you?
Yes, indeed. Breast cancer is still the most common cancer in this country. And between this October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and next October, 55,000 new women will be diagnosed with the disease. And Elizabeth Hurley has urged women to take control of their bodies and regularly self-check for signs of breast cancer. Inspired by her own family's experience, the Hollywood star has spent years campaigning for better awareness around the disease.
Certainly when I was growing up, breast cancer wasn't something that was talked about. And when my grandmother was diagnosed in the early 90s, she found her own lump and was mortified and embarrassed and didn't tell anybody, including her doctor, for way over a year, by which time it unfortunately had spread. And during her treatment and her diagnosis, we didn't know really anything about it, and I don't think she knew much about it either. So that's really why this campaign was started all those years ago, to try to make breast cancer not something that was whispered about, but something that was shouted about.
Even really young women. We hear lots about young women getting breast cancer now that perhaps we didn't before. I don't know why that is, but it's not just an old woman's disease, is it?
No, more and more younger women are being diagnosed with breast cancer. That for sure is a number on the rise, which could be for several reasons. One, a reason that scientists don't know yet, but two, it can be because they are being screened earlier and they are more breast aware.
What would your overall message be to people who are watching this?
Familiarise yourself with your own breasts. Be aware of any changes. Don't be afraid to go to the doctor if you feel there's something wrong. And as you say, be persistent if you really feel there's something wrong, and don't be scared to ask for help, but go quickly. Quickly. Speed is of the essence.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. How much pink do you have in your wardrobe?
Oh, Jackie, I have a lot of pink. I've been doing this for 28 years, and around that time, Evelyn Lauder decided to invent a ribbon to represent breast cancer around the world. And she was inspired by the AIDS activists who at that time in the early 90s had a red ribbon to educate everybody about AIDS. And she thought we should have a ribbon, co-created the ribbon with a lady called Alexandra Penny, who was the editor of Self magazine. And they decided to make it pink because they said pink was a colour that every woman could wear in a certain shade, and that it was out there and would really make people remember the campaign, which at that time was mostly about awareness. So the pink ribbon was born. My pink wardrobe started to grow, and I would say today probably 25% of my wardrobe is pink. And I love it. I wear pink all year round, but I always think of the pink ribbon and Evelyn every time I put something pink on.
Really wish I wore my pink suit today now, Jackie. I feel a bit left out with you ladies, but...
Tomorrow.
Exactly, but a really important message, and one that I know that you'll back up.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of was a fun question at the end, because every time I see Elizabeth, she is always dressed in pink because she's always working for Estee Lauder, who deserve praise for starting the conversation about breast cancer. As she said, in the 90s, not that long ago, nobody would be talking about it, and people would be embarrassed, and women would be, oh, I just don't have time for breast cancer, and no one's got time for it. But you need to go to the doctor as soon as possible if you find anything, and you also need to check often so that you can find something if it's there. I mean, it's horrible if it is there, but you need to know one way or the other, because it still kills a lot of women in this country every year. 11,500, 31 a day still die of breast cancer, even though the recovery is excellent compared to what it was in the 90s.
In the meantime, while we've got you, Jackie, a story about Kevin Kegan you wanted to bring us as well.
Yes, this is an interesting one. I think it divides opinion. The former England and Newcastle manager Kevin Kegan has been criticised for his comments on female pundits. Here's what Kegan said. I don't like to listen to ladies talking about the England men's team at the match because I don't think it's the same experience. I have a problem with that. But if I see an England lady footballer saying about England against Scotland at Wembley and she's saying, if I would have been in that position, I would have done this, I don't think it's quite the same. I don't think it crosses over that much. Or Women in Football, an organisation dedicated to advancing women's ambitions within the game, had this to say. Kegan seems to be advocating a kind of gender apartheid in football, whereby the men's game can only be discussed by men and ladies are banished to a separate room. Kegan and people of a similar mindset have a moral obligation to keep their opinions to themselves, rather than add weight to the narrative that enables online abuse and threats of violence every day simply for doing their job. And former footballer Joey Barton has come out in support of his ex-manager, posting, Kegan, Ballon d'Or winner 1978, England manager, he's bang on. Well, he's entitled to his opinion, but I don't think it'll be shared by that many people, Anna.
Jackie, thanks very much indeed. And we'll see you again later in the hour. For the moment, thanks, Jackie. See you later. Let's take a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will bring unseasonably warm conditions, especially to the southeast, whereas heavy rain will affect Scotland. Ireland, Northern Ireland and central Britain will be rather dull this morning with outbreaks of rain, heavy in places. Fog will affect some coasts and hills too. Elsewhere, it'll be mainly dry with plenty of sunshine. It'll be warmer than yesterday, but rather blustery, with northern Scotland and Irish Sea coastal areas at risk of gales. And the afternoon will see rain edging across more of the north.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the Princess of Wales has swapped the pantsuit for a tracksuit this week during a sports day in East Yorkshire, where she also got a little surprise from a young player. Princess Catherine was playing indoor rugby during a trip to Hull when one of her teammates gave her a bit of a jump from behind. She'd also joined Disability Rugby League's players for a session of wheelchair rugby as well. Do stay with us. Got lots coming up for you here on Sky News Breakfast, including after a huge swing to Labour in last night's Scottish by-election. We'll speak to a pollster about what a general election could look like. Also, the miraculous rescue of this turtle found dehydrated on the shores of Scotland. A reminder now of our top stories here this morning, and a 36-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to kidnap. It's believed his intended target was this morning presenter Holly Willoughby. Labour has triumphed in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election, with Sir Keir Starmer hailing it as a seismic result for his party. And the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNICEF, estimates 43 million children have been forced to abandon their homes due to extreme weather in the past 6 years. So let's get more on that by-election. And Sir Keir Starmer has described his party's victory last night as seismic. But what does it really tell us about Labour's prospects in a general election? Well, joining me now is the pollster Mark Diffley. Very good morning to you, Mark Diffley. Thanks so much for talking to us. So what did you make of the result then?
Well, it's been quite the night, actually, up here in Scotland. It feels a little like the political weather is changing. Labour outperformed both its expectations, and the SNP underperformed its expectations. I think we all expected, I think, that Labour would win the by-election, but I think the size of the victory, a swing of over 20% from the SNP to Labour, frankly took everyone by surprise, not just observers like me, but actually the parties themselves.
Well, yes, and we're always told not to read too much into single by-elections, but it is tempting to look at some of the signs that perhaps it's shown us. How much encouragement can Labour take from the result? They do need to take seats off the SNP if they're going to win a general election. What does this result tell us about their chances of pulling that off, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is a rule of thumb that we shouldn't read too much into a single by-election, particularly one where as in this case, the turnout was quite low, under 40%, so 37%. But it does confirm what we're seeing in the polls up here, that Labour is recovering. The timing is absolutely perfect, of course, for Labour, because it's about to start its UK-wide conference. So it gives that real momentum. And momentum is the key word here. It gives Labour momentum, which is absolutely key. Now, of course, for the SNP, they will point to the specific nature of this by-election caused by an event which some viewers may remember from 3 years ago, when the sitting MP broke the COVID rules. And so they will point to that, and they will point to the low turnout and hope that actually things aren't quite as bad as they would appear. But I think for Labour, this signifies both, I think, a return to previous dominance here in Scotland, and actually, more importantly, I think in the short term, given how close we are to a general election, it makes Keir Starmer's job of winning power next year much easier, because if they win, say, 30 seats in Scotland, or this would indicate that they might win up to 40 seats in Scotland, then it makes his job a hell of a lot easier next year.
And how much did independence feature in this by-election, and how important would it be for Labour if they've managed to persuade some yes voters, some yes to independence voters, to vote Labour?
Yeah, so what we're seeing in the polling is that actually quite a few independent supporters are turning to Labour. So what's really interesting in polling at the moment is that support for independence remains pretty strong. So it remains in the kind of mid to high 40s, but support for the SNP has, as demonstrated by this by-election result, has fallen away. And while that's great for Labour, it does, of course, present a new challenge for them. Is in that how do they kind of nuance their position in relation to another independence referendum and the constitutional question more generally. If they're picking up the support, it does make it a little harder for them. At the moment, of course, both from Labour up here in Scotland and Labour at the UK level, they are absolutely firm that they will not countenance another independence referendum, and I don't think we would see any change in that position anytime soon.
How disappointing for Humza Yousaf. This was his first big test since taking over as leader.
It is, and I don't think he's. I mean, to be honest, I don't think he's under any immediate pressure, but it does follow what's been a really, really difficult kind of first 6 or 7 months for the new First Minister. He's obviously had significant, he took over a really bad time for the SNP, losing support in the polls, obviously the ongoing police investigation into the party's finances, and of course the context of this by-election around law breaking amongst its previous MP. So this will, he'd have thought that this might be a chance to arrest some of that decline and get back on the front foot. But actually, what's happened is that the result is worse for the SNP than they would have anticipated, and therefore, there's going to have to be a lot of soul searching within the party as to how they recover from this.
OK, well, Mark, definitely really interesting to get your take on last night's results. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us this morning. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Rob Powell is back. Hello again.
Hi.
I spoke to Pat Mcfadden earlier from Labour. They seem pretty happy with this result, and the timing couldn't really be better for them, could it?
Yeah, in terms of momentum and mood, going into the Labour Party's annual conference, which is due to kick off in Liverpool this weekend, it couldn't be better. I think one of the really interesting points that you were talking about with Mark there was about when you sort of lay over what happened with this by-election in terms of what is happening with support for independence. Can you get a sense of whether these are yes to independence voters moving across to Labour? And he seemed to suggest there might be a little bit of that going on, and clearly that has the sort of, what flows from that is what Labour does in terms of its stance on another referendum and independence. It will probably do what it did in this by-election and try to talk about it as little as possible to avoid putting off some of those independence voters. You're getting the sort of blame game erupting a little bit of what made up the Labour vote here. You've got the SNP saying, look, this is a collapse in the Tory vote. You've got the Tories saying these are people unhappy with the SNP. I think in reality it's probably a bit of both. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a degree of tactical voting going on here as well. Remember, the Scottish Conservative leader made a few waves a few months ago when he appeared to suggest that Tory voters could back Labour in order to get the SNP out. Will that be replicated at a general election? What Labour needed to show here was basically that, yes, they could take it, but they could take it in a pretty barnstorming fashion as well, because you can't really read across too much from by-elections into general elections, apart from looking at the direction of travel and the broad strength and the pace at which that travel is taking place, if you like. This shows that they are competitive in Scotland again. And I think for a general election, that's good news for them.
Well, yes, remind us how important that is. I mean, Labour need to win seats in Scotland from the SNP, don't they, if they're going to win the general election? But they have this interesting dynamic going on where they have to win seats off the Tories in other parts of the country. So it's going to be a difficult message for them, isn't it?
Yeah, you think back to 2005, 2010, Labour had low 40s seats in Scotland. The last time they were in government, they had 41, I think. If you put this swing and put it uniformly across Scotland in a general election, you get about that number of seats as well. So they need to be picking up a lot of seats in Scotland to be able to make it into number 10. I think Pat Mcfadden even said that. He said, look, it becomes a lot easier to get into government if we're winning in Scotland. But as you put your finger on when you were talking to Labour earlier, how do they do that when they're almost trying to kind of punch left, if you like, to get votes off the SNP in Scotland, but punch right to get votes off the Tories in England? Maybe what it means is what we saw with Michael Shanks, where he's given a bit of leeway, where candidates in Scotland are given a bit of leeway to stray from the central Labour line, party line. We saw that on issues like the benefit cap and gender as well. Maybe that's how you do it. But that does feed into what is the broader Tory attack line on Keir Starmer, that he just believes whatever to get into power and that Labour are flip-floppy on these policies. I think all of that is sort of very much in the weeds. The main takeaway from this is that when we look at by-election results that Labour has won, there is often something lurking in there that suggests that the detail doesn't live up to the headline. I don't think there's anything in this to undermine this result. It's an unambiguously good result for Labour, and coming on the eve of their conference, I don't think it could have gone any better for them, quite frankly.
Yeah, and they certainly look pretty happy about it. OK, Rob, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now then, time to go back to Jackie. We've been missing her. Jackie, you got all the sport now. Over to you.
I was only on a few minutes ago. You can't possibly be missing me already. But Liverpool definitely missing the goals, but they are back. We're going to start with the football last night, and summer signing Ryan Gravenberch scored his first goal for Liverpool as they beat Union Saint-Gilloise in the Europa League. Well, Gravenberch scored just before half-time. Liverpool putting behind them the non-goal controversy and defeat in the Premier League. The Belgian side applied late pressure in the match, but Liverpool secured the win when Diogo Jota scored in the second minute of added time. West Ham made it 2 wins from 2 and topped their Europa League group after they beat SC Freiburg 2-1. West Ham took an early lead through Lucas Paqueta before Roland Salai equalised for Freiburg after half-time. Naïef Aguerd scored the winning goal for the Hammers with just over 20 minutes to go, and it means they top Group A. Brighton came from 2 goals down to draw 2-2 in Marseille. They conceded 2 goals in the space of 90 seconds as Chancel Mbemba and Jordan Veretout put Marseille ahead. Roberto De Zerbi's side pulled a goal back through Pascal Gross before they were awarded a penalty, which João Pedro then scored to level the game. In the Europa Conference League, Aston Villa picked up all 3 points with a 1-0 win against the Bosnian side Zrinjski Mostar. Midfielder John McGinn scored in the 4th minute of added time to secure his side's first win in the competition. Bojan Miovski earned Aberdeen's first European point in almost 16 years with a late equaliser against HJK Helsinki. Let's go to cricket. It was the worst possible start for England's defence of their World Cup title, thrashed by 9 wickets by New Zealand in Ahmedabad, the team they narrowly beat in the final of the World Cup 4 years ago. This was good revenge. New Zealand set a target of 283. Things looked promising for England when Sam Curran struck with his first ball to remove Will Young. But a second wicket partnership between Devon Conway and Rashin Ravindra brought New Zealand up 100 at the start of the 13th over. Both Conway and Ravindra hit stunning centuries. Conway ended 152 not out. Ravindra was unbeaten on 123 as the pair combined for a sensational 273 run partnership. That is the 4th highest in men's World Cup history. Definitely deserving of a round of applause and a standing ovation. Brilliant. And just a little well done to finish with to Ilya Kovtun of Ukraine, who last night got the overall medal at the Gymnastics World Championships behind Hashimoto, the champion, the Olympic champion. Why is this silver so special? Because Ukrainian sportspeople are training in exile, away from family and friends, against the backdrop of war. He's been training in Croatia. It was a great effort. He said afterwards, it's very special. It was indeed. That is all your sport. I will see you very shortly.
Jackie, thanks very much indeed. Now, this is, I think, my favourite story of the morning, an incredible tale of how a malnourished and dehydrated turtle was rescued. Iona is named after the Hebridean island on which she was found almost 2 years ago. Cold, dehydrated and more than 1,000 miles from home. She was taken from Iona to Scarborough Sea Life Centre to begin her rehabilitation, recuperation and recovery. And now she's completed her journey and has been set free back into the wild off the Azores in Portugal. Well, a little earlier, we spoke to a member of the team who rescued her.
It's really hard to rehabilitate turtles. You need to very, very carefully and gradually increase the temperature. You can't just heat them up immediately to make them warm and solve the cold stunning problem. So it's a really gradual process, and the early days really are touch and go as to whether they're going to make it or not. Sadly, a number of them that do go into rehab don't make it through. So any success and every success is a really massive achievement.
Yeah, lovely story that. Still to come here on Sky News Breakfast. Do stay with us. A new wartime series from Steven Spielberg detailing the lives of World War II pilots. We'll speak to the granddaughter of one of them next.
And now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the
most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
This is going to be the biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail.
Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with your eye now.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
The pound has rallied, moderation, interest rates peaking.
I'm up at 6%.
The highest for 14 years.
Will that be the peak? Will it be a little bit lower?
Crisis.
It's closer to a potential crash.
So many words, so many meanings. But what do they mean for you and your finances? Stay up to date on Sky News.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Now, Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks have once again joined forces, this time to produce a mini-series exploring the perilous raids carried out by airmen during World War II. And I'm joined now by the granddaughter of the pilot at the centre of the story. Here's Chloe Melas. Welcome to you. Thanks so much for coming in. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
So tell us a little bit about your grandfather and why he's one of these people that's being featured in this mini-series.
My grandfather, Frank Murphy, he was in the 100th Bomb Group, part of the 8th Air Force during World War II, and he flew 21 missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. And actually on Tuesday is the 80th anniversary of when he was shot down over Munster. And he was a prisoner of war for 18 months in Stalag Luft III, where the Great Escape took place. And in the 1990s, he decided, he was from Atlanta, Georgia, and after retirement, he had worked for Lockheed Martin, and he worked with airplanes his entire life and was in Saudi Arabia and all these. He had this very interesting life he also writes about in the book. But he decided to take pen to paper and write this for the family, for his 7 grandchildren, for his 4 children. And he wrote this book in retirement, never expecting it to be published on a wide scale. And so after having my 2 boys, and years later, I went to the family and I said, we need to publish Grandpa's book. And so it was this small but mighty task that turned into this massive, massive undertaking. And, it's been difficult because he's no longer with us. My grandfather died in 2006, but I think that he would think that this is just incredible, that this is happening and that the mini-series Masters of the Air, it's the trilogy to Band of Brothers, is coming out in January, and that he's a character in that. I think he'd be thrilled.
Fantastic. And so how did Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks get to know so much about your grandfather? Had they seen the memoir?
So, we think that they did see the memoir early, but it's been like over a decade in the making, this TV series. What they did see was Don Miller. He's a famous historian, his book, Masters of the Air. And so they optioned Masters of the Air, and Don knew my grandfather, and he interviewed my grandfather for his for his book. And so my grandfather, Frank Murphy, was mentioned in Masters of the Air, and Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg decided that they wanted to tell the stories of the 100th bomb group known as the Bloody 100th. And so my grandfather was a navigator in the 100th, and so they feature these guys and Austin Butler's in the series and Rafferty Law, Jude Law's son, and all of these incredible actors. And so I haven't seen it yet, but it comes out in January, and I have just heard wonderful, wonderful things.
Yeah, it would be amazing to see your flesh and blood
and my
on the
grandmother
screen.
is still alive. She's 93 years young. So it's so beautiful for our family to know that my grandmother will get to see this series, and also to just know that this book is publishing. I mean, my grandfather has English roots, English and Irish roots, and his last name's Murphy, right? And so he would be so thrilled to know that this book is being published here in the UK, and that everyone around the world has this opportunity to read this book.
And it is an extraordinary story. You talked about him being shot down, and you talk about the Bloody 100th. The reason it was called that was because they suffered so many losses, didn't they?
So many casualties.
And his story was extraordinary because he was a prisoner of war for some time, wasn't he? And what did he go through? It must have been horrendous to read.
On the cover of the book, we have this beautiful quote by Tom Hanks. And in the quote, Tom says, "How did those boys do such things?" And that's the truth. These were just boys. They were barely 18, 19 years old, and here they are with no flying experience, going up in these unpressurized, massive bombers, flying over Nazi-occupied Europe. Most of them have never even been out of the country before. And my grandfather, you know, they have to fly 25 missions, and then they get to go home. My grandfather flew 21 missions. He almost made it to 25. And on that 21st mission, he gets shot down over Munster, Germany. He has this incredible story in the book about how he's parachuting out of his aircraft that's on fire, and he had been injured in the shoulder, and 2 of the men on his aircraft died that day. So it goes back to the title of Luck of the Draw. He says in the book, you either had your name on a bullet or you didn't, and it simply came down to luck. And so in the book, I think, you know, he writes a little bit about survivor's guilt. He says he spent the rest of his life walking with ghosts. He didn't talk about his experiences, as many men from World War II in that time, they didn't speak about it. Right? It wasn't until decades later that my grandfather opened up. His own 4 children didn't know what he went through until he wrote this book for our family.
So what was that like as the family, to find out all these things that had happened to him that he hadn't shared?
My mother says when she read the book, it felt like reading a movie. It felt like The Great Escape and with Steve McQueen coming to life. And my grandfather was so proud but so humble, he did not consider himself a hero. He felt like he was just supporting his fellow man to his left, to his right, and doing his duty to, you know, save Europe, save the United States, and they did. The world would be a much different place if these men did not do what they did. We would have a much different life today. We owe so much of our freedom to the men, these young men. And I'm here in England for the next several days. I'll be going to Thorpe Abbotts, to the Air Force Base in East Anglia that he flew out of the day that he was shot down. And like I said, he was in the same prison camp as The Great Escape. He was there when The Great Escape happened, and he writes about it in the book. He did this incredible death march to Mooseburg. They were going to Stalag 7A, another prison camp, and it's sub-zero temperatures. I mean, I think it's cold when I just get out of my car and run to get a coffee. I mean, it really puts life into perspective. He writes that in the middle of the night, he grabbed his pitiful belongings, and they made this trek to a God only knows where destination. And where was that destination? A prison camp that was built for 10,000 men, and over 100,000 men were put there. And he was put in a boxcar for 3 days and 3 nights. And he writes about all of this in the book. And I'm just so grateful, being a mom of 2 boys, to be able to have these stories, but to also be able to share it with everyone.
Well, yes, and how do you think that he would feel about the fact that his life is going to be on the screen for people to see? Would he be embarrassed by that, or would he think it's important to share the stories of what happened? Very briefly.
He never showed emotion. He was a very stoic, quiet, humble man, but I think he'd shed a tear or 2. I think he would be very honoured and very appreciative. He was a very, very big fan of Band of Brothers in the Pacific. I think he would say what he always said he would say. I think it's really neat.
Amazing. Well, he sounds like an extraordinary man. Chloe Mellors, thanks so much for coming and telling us about your grandfather. And good luck with the book. Thank you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will bring unseasonably warm conditions, especially to the southeast, whereas heavy rain will affect Scotland. Ireland, Northern Ireland and central Britain will be rather dull this morning, with some outbreaks of rain, heavy in places. Fog will affect some coasts and hills as well. Elsewhere, it'll be mainly dry, with plenty of sunshine, and it'll be warmer than yesterday, but rather blustery, with northern Scotland and Irish Sea coastal areas at risk of gales.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up on Sky News Breakfast, Labour takes Rutherglen and Hamilton West from the SNP overnight. We'll have all the latest. Hello everyone, it's 9 o'clock. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Sir Keir Starmer hails Labour's victory over the SNP in Rutherglen and Hamilton West as a seismic moment. It's Friday, the 6th of October.
Michael Shanks, Scottish Labour Party, 17,840.
It's the first time that Labour has ever won a seat from the SNP in a by-election, and they did it with a swing of more than 20%. Also ahead, police arrest a man on suspicion of conspiracy to kidnap, with ITV's Holly Willoughby believed to be his intended target. Also ahead, 43 million children forced to abandon their homes and schools because of storms, floods and wildfires in the past 6 years.
Also ahead, Elizabeth Hurley tells me why it's so important for women to take control of their bodies and regularly check for signs of breast cancer.
Be persistent if you really feel there's something wrong, and don't be scared to ask for help, but go quickly. Quickly. Speed is of the essence.
And after a week of VAR controversy, Liverpool returned to action with a 2-0 win in the Europa League.
Hello, a very good morning and welcome to Sky News Breakfast. Sir Keir Starmer is claiming what he calls a seismic win over the SNP in Scotland. A swing of more than 20% to Labour saw candidate Michael Shanks take Rutherglen and Hamilton West, the first time they've ever won a seat at a by-election from the Nationalists. Well, the vote was triggered after the incumbent Margaret Ferrier was suspended from Parliament for breaching COVID rules in 2020. So let's take a closer look at the results. And Scottish Labour's Michael Shanks won with 17,844 votes. That's more than double the SNP with 8,399. And the Scottish Conservatives lost their deposit with just 1,192 votes. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, reports.
A jubilant welcome for Labour's newest MP, Michael Shanks, as he arrived at the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election count with the Scottish Labour leader, Anna Sarwar. The result was never in doubt on the night. The only issue was whether Labour's victory would be big enough to provide a springboard for major gains from the SNP for Sir Keir Starmer at the general election.
Michael Shanks, Scottish Labour Party, 17,840.
Minutes later came confirmation that Mr Shanks had overturned an SNP majority of more than 5,000 into a Labour majority approaching 10,000, with a massive swing of more than 20%.
And I declare that Michael Shanks is elected to serve in the United Kingdom Parliament as a member for Rutherglen and Hamilton West constituency.
Mr Shanks claimed the Labour Party is on the way back.
There's absolutely no doubt that this result shows that there's no part of the United Kingdom that Labour can't win. It's been a long time in Scotland, Labour building back to a place where people can trust us again. The leadership of Keir Starmer and Anna Sarwar's got us to a place where people have put their trust in us.
Mr Sarwar claimed the result has profound implications for the whole of the UK.
In the last 2 years of my leadership, we have tried to get Scottish Labour back in the pitch, to give the people of Scotland a Labour Party worthy of the name. And what we can see is Scotland's going to lead the way in delivering a UK Labour government.
The SNP blamed the COVID rule-breaking of former MP Margaret Ferrier for the scale of the party's defeat.
Margaret Ferrier's behaviour throughout this entire process has been disgraceful. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There is no doubt that this backdrop for this by-election has been challenging for the SNP. I think the First Minister has acknowledged that from the outset. But look, I think you cannot transpose a result at a by-election with a very low turnout and transpose that to a general election.
The Conservatives' vote collapsed, with their candidate losing his deposit. But even though this was only a by-election, based on this result, Labour could win up to 40 seats in Scotland at the general election. John Craig, Sky News, Hamilton.
Well, let's take you live now to Hamilton and speak to Conor Gillis, who's there for us this morning. So, Conor, just how significant a win is this for Labour in Scotland, and how much of a blow for the SNP?
I think this is a defining moment in that path towards a general election, Anna. We've got Keir Starmer arriving in this part of the world within the next hour or two. Clearly, he will have a spring in his step because the context around this is absolutely key. After the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, the Labour vote collapsed here in Scotland. For very many years, Labour have only had one MP north of the border, and this victory in this building here behind me overnight has meant that the party has doubled its numbers here to 2. Michael Shanks winning in this constituency. And what does that mean? Well, it has been a huge swing from the SNP to Labour, a 20% swing, and clearly with all the usual caution and caveats. What could that mean for the next general election? Well, let's take a look at some of the predictions. Let's look at 2019. The SNP won 48 seats here in Scotland. Labour, as I said, just 1. Let's project forward. Sky News suggesting that Scottish Labour could be on course to win 42 seats next time around, with the SNP dropping dramatically down to 6, on par with the Scottish Conservatives. How does that look in terms of the map? Well, clearly that is a sea of red and a dramatic change in fortunes for the SNP, who have been at the centre of a police investigation. They have lost their long-standing leader, Nicola Sturgeon, who along with her husband was arrested and released without charge pending further investigation. A painful, a bruising night for the Nationalists, who now need to reset as they try and figure out the path ahead for the next general election.
Connor, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's take a look at some of the day's other stories now. And police have confirmed a 36-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to kidnap as part of an ongoing investigation. It's believed his intended target was this morning presenter Holly Willoughby. The man from Harlow remains in custody after an arrest on Wednesday. At least 31 people have been killed and more than 100 more missing after a major hydroelectric dam in India has burst. A drone strike on a Syrian army college has killed at least 80 people. Hundreds were injured in the attack on a military graduation ceremony attended by young officers and their families in the city of Homs. Syria's military has accused insurgents backed by known international forces, but no group has claimed responsibility. 5 people have been charged with aggravated trespass after Just Stop Oil protesters disrupted a performance of Les Miserables in London's West End on Wednesday. The protesters stormed the stage and asked audience members to join the rebellion, a move which led to the show being abandoned. So Keir Starmer has ruled out reversing Rishi Sunak's decision to scrap the northern leg of HS2 should Labour get into government. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, confirmed it would be scrapped this week during the Conservative Party conference. An investigation is underway after a fire broke out at Marco Simoni Golf and Country Club yesterday, just days after the venue staged Europe's victory in the Ryder Cup. The fire began near the 18th green in the city's northeastern suburb of Guidonia. Now, UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Agency, estimates that 43 million children were displaced by storms, floods and wildfires over the past 6 years. So let's find out a bit more. Matthew Thompson is here with me. Welcome back, Matthew. So it's a huge number, isn't it?
It's kind of always hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? A figure like 43 million people. Essentially what UNICEF have done is they've looked at displaced children, that's children who were forced to leave their homes due to natural disasters over a 6-year period from 2016 to 2021 inclusive. And what they found is that the equivalent, effectively, of 20,000 children every single day were displaced from their homes over that 6-year period across 44 different countries. Over the whole period, it was a total, as you say, of 43 million displacements, not necessarily displaced children, because in some extraordinary cases, children can be displaced more than once. And also, almost more alarmingly, what UNICEF are saying is that they predict, given climate change and the increased frequency of natural disasters, that potentially in the next 3 decades, 100 million more children could be displaced. Now, of the 43 million that they looked at between 2016 and 2021, 95% were due to floods, and we've seen plenty of those this year alone. If you look at places like Libya, of course, Greece as well. Other major factors were drought, Somalia being a big country that has suffered greatly from drought. That was about 1.3 million of the displacements. And also wildfires. Over 800,000 of the displacements were due to wildfires. But extraordinarily, a third of those were in 2020 alone. And so overall, as I say, the fear from UNICEF is that as we see climate change becoming more entrenched, more and more of these natural disasters happening, it's children who will bear the brunt.
Oh, really sobering figures there from UNICEF. Matthew, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. Now then, time to bring in Jackie, who has the sport for us later on. But first, Jackie, you wanted to tell us about an interview that you've done with a really important message.
Yeah, absolutely. Elizabeth Hurley does this every year. She kind of does it all year round, really, but particularly in October when you're really focused on breast cancer awareness. She's urged women to take control of their bodies and regularly self-check for signs of breast cancer. Inspired by her own family's experience, the Hollywood star has spent years campaigning for better awareness around the disease.
Certainly when the campaign was started 30 years ago, there was virtually no awareness of breast cancer. The pink ribbon hadn't been invented. October as Breast Cancer Awareness Month didn't exist. And certainly when I was growing up, breast cancer wasn't something that was talked about. And when my grandmother was diagnosed in the early 90s, she found her own lump and was mortified and embarrassed and didn't tell anybody, including her doctor, for way over a year, by which time it unfortunately had spread. And during her treatment and her diagnosis, we didn't know really anything about it, and I don't think she knew much about it either. So that's really why this campaign was started all those years ago, to try to make breast cancer not something that was whispered about, but something that was shouted about.
Culturally, and in some communities, it's still a really delicate subject, though, isn't it, in Asian communities?
It's very important, yes, for us to learn about these difficulties because it is such a diverse disease and it affects people differently in different parts of our communities. Different types of breast cancer affect different groups of women very differently. And we're finding out more and more about that and putting more and more of our research money actually into studies to examine how breast cancer can affect different diverse communities.
If you find a lump and you go to your GP and your GP says it's probably nothing, should you be firm in that situation and say, well, maybe it's nothing, but I would like a referral? How important is it to sort of stand your ground?
Well, in my experience from the women I've spoken to, if they found a lump in their breasts, the NHS deals with it very quickly in taking them to the next stage, which is a biopsy. I think sometimes I've heard that people can go to the doctor, especially when they're younger, and just don't feel great. They know, most of us know our bodies, and we know when something doesn't feel right, and it might not be something as tangible as a lump. It could just be feeling bad, and then in that case, I think you do have to be very firm to try to get as many tests as you can, at the very least a blood test.
Even really young women, we hear lots about young women getting breast cancer now that perhaps we didn't before. I don't know why that is, but it's not just an old woman's disease, is it?
No, more and more younger women are being diagnosed with breast cancer. That for sure is a number on the rise, which could be for several reasons. One, a reason that scientists don't know yet, but two, it can be because they are being screened earlier and they are more breast aware. So, for example, during our COVID years, where we couldn't be doing this interview, we couldn't do anything live, we had to rely a lot on social media to get our messaging across, and we did a lot of it. And I did for our breast cancer campaign, I did something talking to women on my Instagram feed about checking their own breasts.
Do you find that the women you meet want something more than just the medical treatment? They need to find other women who are in the same boat as them. It's almost like, I've got to find someone else who's like me.
I think certainly in the studies we've all done, it seems incredibly important for the support groups and for the support that ladies undergoing treatment can get. I mean, we're sitting here in Future Dreams House where people can come, talk to other people who are undergoing treatment and get support and get help and just have respite. And I think with the ambassadors that we're working with now in England, one from the Southeast Asian community, one from the Black community, who they've both done exactly that. They're forming support groups and they're finding ways to support women who are going through treatment.
We mustn't forget, one man a day is diagnosed with breast cancer, and they must be desperate to find someone else in their shoes.
I've met men who've had breast cancer and who've had their breasts removed, lumps removed, been through chemo, been through radiation. But also, of course, men are affected by breast cancer by being husbands, fathers, brothers. I mean, they're very affected, of course. We know that.
What would your overall message be to people who are watching this?
I would say be breast aware. Familiarise yourself with your own breasts. Be aware of any changes. Don't be afraid to go to the doctor if you feel there's something wrong. And as you say, be persistent if you really feel there's something wrong, and don't be scared to ask for help, but go quickly. Quickly. Speed is of the essence.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. How much pink do you have in your wardrobe?
Oh, Jackie, I have a lot of pink. I've been doing this for 28 years, and around that time, Evelyn Lauder decided to invent a ribbon to represent breast cancer around the world. And she was inspired by the AIDS activists who, at that time in the early 90s, had a red ribbon to educate everybody about AIDS. And she thought we should have a ribbon, co-created the ribbon with a lady called Alexandra Penny, who was the editor of Self magazine. And they decided to make it pink because they said pink was a colour that every woman could wear in a certain shade, and that it was out there and would really make people remember the campaign, which at that time was mostly about awareness. So the pink ribbon was born. My pink wardrobe started to grow, and I would say today probably 25% of my wardrobe is pink. And I love it. I wear pink all year round, but I always think of the pink ribbon and Evelyn every time I put something pink on.
So, Jackie, such important advice there that she was sharing, wasn't it? Everyone should sit up and listen.
Yeah, absolutely. If you find something, you might not like it, but it's better to know than not know what it is. 9 times out of 10, if you find a lump, it's probably absolutely nothing and benign. But you just never know, and it could save your life if you act quickly. People don't have time for breast cancer. Women don't have time for it. They're very, very busy. No one does, but you have to get it sorted as quickly as possible, because your chances then are so much better.
Yeah,
most people survive it.
Yeah, really important message, and something that I know that Elizabeth Hurley, as you were saying, has campaigned so hard on. But we're going to change subjects now, because you've got sport coming up later. But in the meantime, we did want to give you the chance to tell us a little bit about Kegan, who's making the news again today. What's up there?
I know, I think this is really going to divide opinion, this story. See what you think. Former England and Newcastle manager Kegan has been criticised for his comments on female pundits. Here's what Kegan said. "I don't like to listen to ladies talking about the England men's team at the match because I don't think it's the same experience. I have a problem with that. But if I see a lady England footballer saying about England against Scotland at Wembley, and she's saying, if I would have been in that position, I would have done this, I don't think it's quite the same. I don't think it crosses over that much." So, Women in Football, an organisation dedicated to advancing women's ambitions within the game, had this to say. Kegan seems to be advocating a kind of gender apartheid in football, whereby the men's game can only be discussed by men and ladies are banished to a separate room. Kegan and people of a similar mindset have a moral obligation to keep their opinions to themselves rather than add weight to the narrative that enables online abuse and threats of violence every day simply for doing their job. And former footballer Joey Barton has come out in support of his ex-manager, posting this. Kegan, Ballon d'Or winner, 1978, England manager, he's bang on. But what about all of those pundits and football writers and commentators who've never, ever played professional football? They're talking about it. What's he got to say about them? Just leave that hanging there.
Yeah, we'll leave it hanging, and I'm sure there'll be lots of discussion on all social media platforms just about this very issue. Jackie, thank you for the moment. You're going to be back with the sport a little bit later, aren't you? But thanks for now. Do stay with us here on Sky News Breakfast. We've got lots coming up for you. We'll have this rather sweet moment as the Princess of Wales is surprised at Sports Day. And after a huge swing to Labour in last night's Scottish by-election, we'll speak to an SNP MP. Plus, after one of the deadliest attacks on Ukraine since the start of the war, we'll speak to an MP from that area. That's next.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
We help you understand the world with us. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who've made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Joe Biden knows the celebrations are over, and this is a country in crisis.
You don't want to be remembered this way. You always want to be remembered as something positive.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again? I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
To the war in Ukraine now, and Ukrainian officials say that 55 people have been killed by a Russian missile strike on a grocery store near Kharkiv. A 6-year-old boy is reported to be amongst the casualties. Well, Ukraine's president accused Russia of genocidal aggression. Well, let's talk now to Maria Mesenzeva, who's a Ukrainian MP for Kharkiv and joins me now live from Kyiv. Welcome to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. So tell us a little bit about this attack that hit a village in the Kharkiv region, an area that you represent.
Thank you. Thank you very much. A terrible afternoon yesterday and a terrible morning today for Kharkiv itself as the capital of the region, having more than 1 million inhabitants, and Kharkiv region as well. So yesterday, the terrorist attack occurred on a small village with a little bit more than 300 inhabitants, which is called in Ukrainian Roza, translated in English as thunder. And this is so inhuman because the rocket type was used Iskander. It has targeted completely civilian place, a cafe where a memorial service for those who died from war was held, which means for Ukrainian security services already to mention that the attack was planned. Someone was given this particular information about the commemoration service and the possible amount of people being gathered in the cafe. So as of now, there was more than 30 people identified by DNA test among 55 life losses, with a 6-year-old boy also being dead and newborn baby injured. This morning, Kharkiv itself, as a city, as a capital of the region, woke up from enormous sound of the shelling, same rocket type Iskander, leaving 23 injured and 10-year-old boy dead. Unfortunately, this is a terrorism which we are facing daily basis in different regions of Ukraine. Every life is precious, and I think we have to follow the peace plan of President Zelensky. And one of the point of it is bringing justice for this multiple war crimes, and most importantly, for the crime of aggression, which Putin and his top political and military leadership is ordering to commit daily basis. However, the aggression itself, as European Court of Justice stated it back in January current year, started from 2014 March in Crimea with an illegal attempt to annex the peninsula. Currently, police officers, the rescue teams are working exhaustively, the prosecutor's office on the ground, to record this war crime, which is soon to be sent to the Hague office to proceed for possible reparations.
And these attacks come as President Zelensky was visiting European leaders. I understand we've lost... Oh, apologies. I think we lost your sound there. I thought you'd finished your point, but I think we just lost your sound for a moment.
No, it's because of alarm notification, sorry.
OK. No, don't apologise. But very briefly, President Zelensky appealing to European leaders in Spain yesterday for more support. But how much concern is there that US political problems and the ousting of the US speaker will make it hard for President Biden to keep weapons flowing into Ukraine? How much concern is there?
We know that the challenge is currently there for the leadership of the House, in the Congress. We know that this political challenge is there. So I know from my sources that the White House is reviewing Pentagon programs, opportunities to relocate the funds still to be voted in the Congress. However, we don't see that the aid #1 in the world, which is coming from US, by the way, #2 coming from UK, will be somehow decreased. There are already allocations in the EU budget for direct military support, a separate funds, 50 billion for the purpose of humanitarian aid, energy, stability, and other purposes, with an understanding of a wide range security. Of course, security guarantees would be something that can bring us to the next level. And that's why President Zelensky is insisting and is committed to bilateral deals, as well as with the United Kingdom. Thank you for all your support, and thank you for discussing this important topic for Ukraine.
OK, well, Maria Mesentseva, a pleasure to speak to you this morning. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will bring unseasonably warm conditions, especially to the southeast, whereas heavy rain will affect Scotland. Ireland, Northern Ireland and central Britain will be rather dull this morning, with outbreaks of rain, heavy in places. Fog will affect some coasts and hills too.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, the Princess of Wales has swapped the pantsuit for the tracksuit. I don't think we call it pantsuit, but it works well. The pantsuit for the tracksuit this week during a sports day in East Yorkshire, where she also got a little surprise from a young player. Princess Catherine was playing indoor rugby during a trip to Hull when one of her teammates gave her a bit of a jump from behind. She'd joined Disability Rugby League players for a session of wheelchair rugby as well. You're watching Sky News Breakfast. Coming up after a huge swing to Labour in last night's Scottish by-election, we'll speak to an SNP MP. That's next. Let's get more on last night's by-election now, which saw a huge 20% swing from the SNP, delivering Labour the victory. Well, let's talk now to David Linden, who's SNP MP for Glasgow East. He joins me now. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for talking to us. This is a big loss for the SNP, a huge swing, 20% swing to Labour. Just how much of a disappointment is this for the SNP?
Well, firstly, on behalf of the SNP, can I congratulate Michael Shanks on his victory last night. Look forward to working with him in Parliament to hold to account some of the things he said during the campaign, particularly when he disassociated himself from quite so many UK Labour policies. But look, there's no getting away from the fact that this has been a challenging night for the SNP. It was a disappointing result, but I think that's got to be caveated by the fact that I am struggling to think of a more suboptimal backdrop to a by-election for the SNP than last night. So we will reflect on that result. We will have our conference in a week's time, and we will rebuild together in the same way that we did in 2017 when we lost this seat and regained it again in 2019. But there's no doubt that we've got to reflect on last night's result, and I can assure you that's what the SNP will do.
Why did the SNP lose, do you think?
Well, I think there were certainly some reminders of the 2017 election where, let's not forget, that 6 in 10 voters simply did not vote last night. In my own case, I think of 2017 when lots of SNP voters stayed at home. We need to think about how we galvanise them and remotivate them to get back out. That's one of the things that is in our control. One of the things that's not in our control has been the total collapse of the Conservative Party's vote that went en masse to Labour. Now, it's for Sir Keir Starmer and his pro-Brexit Labour Party to explain why so many Conservative voters felt that making the leap from voting Conservative to Labour wasn't necessarily much of a leap, given the rightwards track that Keir Starmer has taken in terms of his party and moving them to the right wing.
But how do you know that? How do you know that the people who voted Tory in 2019 all voted Labour this time? We can't know that, can we?
Well, I think it's certainly evident from the total collapse in the Conservative vote share. Bear in mind, the Conservatives in Scotland would normally poll somewhere around about 17–18%. I mean, they lost their deposit last night. It was certainly very evident to me and many people, including, I think, Labour activists going round the campaign trail over this campaign, that Conservative voters were tactically voting with the Labour Party. That's not something that's necessarily within the SNP's control, but we will reflect over the course of the coming days and weeks about what we need to do to redouble our efforts in advance of the general election campaign. And on that point, I think it's worth remembering this is a by-election. By-elections are always challenging for mid-term governments, as the SNP is. And I would always be very careful about extrapolating a vote at a by-election and transposing that to a general election.
Yes, and yet, are you concerned this is about a rejection of the SNP and that it could signal the start of a broader political decline for the party?
Well, I remember being asked those questions in 2017 when I think Labour picked up 6 or 7 seats in Scotland. Let's not forget, at the subsequent election, just 2 years later, they were reduced to 1 seat again. So we have been here before, and it's incumbent upon the SNP to reflect on that result, respond accordingly. And I think that's exactly what you're going to see from First Minister Humza Yousaf at our conference when it takes place next weekend.
OK, well, we appreciate your time. David Linden, SNP MP for Glasgow East. Thanks very much indeed for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's reflect a little bit more on this by-election result and get the thoughts of former SNP MP Stephen Gethin, as well as the Scottish political correspondent for the Sunday Times, John Boothman. A very good morning to both of you. Nice to see you both there. Stephen Gethin, how concerning do you think this is for the SNP?
Well, it's concerning. This is I mean, they got beat in a by-election. It was a big swing against them. David talks about the collapse in the Conservative vote. He's right to do so, but that also points to a challenge in terms of that consolidation sometimes of a pro-union vote as well. So I think the party needs to reflect. There's another year away from the Westminster election, we believe. That gives the party the opportunity to reflect, have a think about what it needs to do. And bear in mind, that the SNP will consider even those Westminster elections as something of a springboard in terms of the Scottish parliamentary elections in 2026. So there's a challenge. The party's got a few things going for it, but in terms of the independent support bearing up, but this is a challenging result for the party and it needs to reflect.
Well, yes, and John Boothman, Labour does need to win a lot of SNP seats like this one if it's going to get Keir Starmer into Downing Street. What does the scale of the swing in this by-election tell us about their prospects of doing that, or if anything at all?
The language the SNP are using this morning when they're talking about things being challenging, concerning, disappointing, this was an absolute drubbing last night for the SNP. Their vote absolutely collapsed. They had 23,000 the last time. They got 8,000 last night. And if that's reflected across the country, there's something fundamentally difficult going forward for the SNP. We're now talking about, the pollsters are talking about Sir John Curtis, 42 seats in Scotland being in play for Labour. Even if it's half that number of seats, the SNP's got a huge problem, but also it's definitely the case that those seats would contribute hugely to the opportunity that Keir Starmer must take if he wants to win to get into Downing Street. But a drubbing for the SNP and a big night for Labour, and maybe something fundamental is going on in Scottish politics.
Stephen Gethin's a big blow for the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, as well. His first significant electoral test, of course, since he took over. What does he need to do now? We heard there from David Linden saying there needs to be a little bit of thought put into this. What can they do to perhaps re-energise their support?
Look, I think there has to be reflection. It's one of these results whereby John's right, you can't ignore it. On the other hand, general elections, Scottish elections are a different matter. We know that there are a certain number of areas, trust in Scottish Government institutions are higher than those in the UK. Independence is still relatively popular. Brexit is unpopular. So there's a challenge for the SNP. How do you get that across? John just talked about, could this contribute to a Labour majority? Well, the Labour aren't taking seats off the Tories in Scotland, they're taking seats off the SNP. So is there a message around having a strong Scottish voice at Westminster? Is there a message around independence? So the party has to think long and hard about what it does. It's got the time to do so, but it does need to reflect very heavily on what happened last night, and also how that plays out elsewhere, because MPs, MSPs will know their own patches much better. There are different local dynamics in different parts of the country, but they need to have a strong think about that and what their message is going into the elections next year.
John, does this result also highlight the difficulties facing Labour as well? They need to win seats off the SNP, a left-wing party in Scotland, but they need to win a lot of seats off the Tories in other parts of the country, and will obviously be trying to woo more right-wing voters. Does that pose a bit of a challenge for Labour come the next general election?
Interestingly enough, again, I was interested in David Linden saying that, a lot of the votes that had come Labour's way last night were Tory tactical votes. It's clear that the biggest number of votes probably came from the SNP, given the collapse in the vote. But yes, there is a difficulty. Keir Starmer has to appeal to two different audiences, maybe a more left-wing Scotland, where the SNP is a left-wing party and left-wing seats, and of course, all of these seats in the red wall, which might be difficult to win back from the Conservatives. But at the end of the day, looking what happened, for example, at Selby in North Yorkshire over the summer, looking what happened in just outside Glasgow last night, it appears that Labour may have the ability to actually do that. I think, though, the main point that comes out of last night is that this whole situation with so many seats in play makes it much, much, much more easy, if it's easy at all, for Starmer to get a majority to get him into Downing Street.
OK, well, John Boothman and Stephen Gethin, it's really interesting to get your thoughts this morning. Thanks so much for your reflections on last night's by-election result. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Now then, back to Jackie. She's got all the sports news this time round. Jackie, over to you.
I have. I've managed to get some gymnastics into the bulletin this morning, but we're going to start with football. And Summerside Ryan Gravenberch scored his first goal for Liverpool as they beat Union Saint-Gilloise in the Europa League last night. Well, putting the VAR controversy in their defeat to Tottenham well behind them, Gravenberch scored for Liverpool just before half-time. The Belgian side applied late pressure, but Liverpool secured the win when Diogo Jota scored in the second minute of added time. West Ham continued their successful start to life in the Europa League with a record-breaking victory at Freiburg. They set a new English record of 17 consecutive European matches unbeaten with a 2-1 win. Lucas Paqueta gave West Ham an 8th-minute lead before Naif Aguer's second-half header made it 2 wins from 2. They are top of Group A, 3 points clear of the Bundesliga side. Pascal Gross scored first and João Pedro added a late penalty as Brighton fought back from 2 goals down to earn their first point in European football with a battling Europa League draw at Marseille. In the Europa Conference League, Aston Villa picked up all 3 points with the 1-0 win against the Bosnian side Zrinjski Mostar. Midfielder John McGinn scored in the 4th minute of added time to secure his side's first win in the competition. Bojan Miovski earned Aberdeen's first European point in almost 16 years with a late equaliser against HJK Helsinki. Let's go to the Cricket World Cup now. And it was the worst possible start for England's defence of their title. They were thrashed by 9 wickets by New Zealand in Ahmedabad, the team they narrowly beat in the final of the World Cup 4 years ago. New Zealand was set a target of 283, and things did look promising for England when Sam Curran struck with his first ball to remove Will Young. But a second wicket partnership between Devon Conway and Rachin Ravindra brought New Zealand up to 100 at the start of the 13th over. Both Conway and Ravindra hit stunning centuries. Conway ended 152 not out, and Ravindra was unbeaten on 123 as the pair combined for a sensational 273-run partnership, and that is the 4th highest in men's World Cup history. No wonder they're standing. And just finally, a little well done, well, a big well done really, to Ilya Kovtun of Ukraine, who last night got the overall silver medal at the Gymnastics World Championships behind Hashimoto, the Olympic champion. Why is this silver so special? Because Ukrainian sports people are training in exile away from family and friends against the backdrop of war. He's been training in Croatia. It is a great effort. He said afterwards, this silver is special. And it was indeed. That is all your sport this morning.
Yeah, that's a pretty inspiring story, isn't it? Jackie, thanks very much indeed. Do stay with us. Coming up after the break.
I can pick a fight with any cat who strays at night and gives it all that. If I'm hungry...
I'll be speaking to author Liz Pitchen about her push to make reading easier for children with dyslexia.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded.
This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with your eye.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
The pound has rallied. Moderation. Interest rates peaking.
I'm up at 6%.
The highest for 14 years.
Will that be the peak? Will it be a little bit lower?
Crisis. It's closer to a potential crash.
So many words, so many meanings. But what do they mean for you and your finances? Stay up to date on Sky News.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
It's like a minute. It's like better.
Fly Emirates, fly better.
Now, new research has found the earlier children start reading for pleasure, the better their mental well-being is later in life. But for those with dyslexia, picking up a book can feel more of a chore. And I'm pleased to say that author Liz Pichon is here with me now. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
Talk about the issue of dyslexia in a moment, but first, you have got, I think it's your 21st book?
My 21st book out, yeah. 5-star stories, hooray.
Amazing, exactly. And the hooray is included in the
It is, yeah.
It wasn't just you going,
No.
So this is the Tom Gates series. I was going to ask if you're still as excited as ever about these books, but looking at your nails, which are in the Tom Gates theme,
Yeah,
and your badge and your shoes and your
can't stop
earrings.
me doodling. It's actually part of how I make my books and how I be creative. And I love it when I'm doing school events and I draw on my shoes and I draw on, and it's a way of, the children will spot the characters on my shoes and they get really excited about it. And it's my way of sort of showing them how you tell a story, you do a book, and actually do a drawing, and then you can put the designs on different products and different things as well and have some fun and get creative. So it's all the things that I used to love doing when I was a kid.
And creativity in every area.
Absolutely, yeah.
So 21 books
Yes.
that you've written, and yet some people might be surprised to hear that you are actually dyslexic.
Absolutely.
So how did that affect your writing? Did it pose challenges for you?
It really did, because, well, for a start, I didn't ever think in a million years that I would end up writing books. So I was a child in the 70s, it wasn't really picked up. Loved, I was always very enthusiastic, a bit like Tom, the character, who is based on me. Very enthusiastic, loved writing, loved stories, but I was terrible at spelling, terrible at maths, like really bad. And so the idea of actually writing stories for a living just never crossed my mind. I was always good at drawing and good at copying and art, and so I started work as an illustrator, and then gradually I got asked to illustrate other people's books, and that got me thinking, okay, if I can illustrate other people's books, then maybe I could write my own. So I started off writing picture books and then gradually morphed into doing books for older children. But it took me a really, really long time. And one of the biggest things I think that happens with children who have dyslexia is you lose your confidence. It really affects self-confidence. You don't think that you can do things. And for me, being dyslexic just meant it took a really long time to actually start writing and have the confidence to do it. I just didn't think I could do it. And so, but 22 books later, or whatever.
Yeah, amazing.
And there's lots of children as well that really enjoy the books as well, because I think because I am dyslexic, I've found a different way to tell my story. So I add in lots of drawings, lots of doodles. I use the typeface to help tell the story. I love those page-turning moments that you get in a picture book, and I try to do them for older children as well. So it's a way of visually telling lots of different stories. And just because a book has pictures in it, it doesn't mean that it's any less worthy. It doesn't mean that children aren't reading. It's actually a really great way to encourage children to pick up a book and get interested in reading.
And has that evolved naturally because of what you were drawn to, or is there part of you that's thinking about dyslexic children when you're producing a book?
I think when I started, my main aim for this particular book, Tom Gates, was I wanted to just put all the things in the book that I knew I loved when I was a kid, which was music, lyrics, poetry, how to make things, how to be creative. So all of that is in the books, and stories, and funny stories. And I think I did that instinctively. And actually, because I think very visually about stories, I loved comics when I was younger as well. Lots of dyslexic children like comics, but it's just a different way of telling stories. We need creativity in everything, and we need to encourage children to sort of pick up a book, to read and use their imaginations. That's a really great thing to do. So if you've got dyslexic children and you want to encourage them, that's a really great way of doing it.
And one of the reasons that you're talking about this today is because it's National Dyslexia Awareness Week, isn't it? And how important is it to discuss these things? Does it help children feel less alone, less different?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. There are so many people. I mean, I'm lucky enough, I get to meet a lot of creative people, and quite often we all are very, not everybody is great at spelling, or great at maths. And it's just as important to be able to, you want to be able to pick up a book, you want to be able to encourage children to read. Because like you said at the beginning, children that read for pleasure do better in all areas of their life. So it's so important that, if they can go to libraries, if they can pick up a book that they're interested in, because nothing puts children off more reading than having to read stuff that they're not interested in, and that's what we want. We want them to start learning to read for pleasure and to have fun. And we've got amazing books in this country. So not only my books, but, you know, we've got fantastic picture books, loads of stories, and we just really want to encourage children to help their self-confidence as well. And, you know, nothing, like I said, nothing puts children off more than reading something that they don't enjoy. So.
And people will have seen an animated version on the
Yes.
screens while you were talking, and they'll think, oh, that was clever, they put that together at the last minute. But it is actually an ongoing series, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We've got another series starting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really involved in writing the scripts as well. My husband and I, we write all the songs for that. We even wrote the theme tune as well. So the third series is going out next year, which we're really excited about. It's going to be fantastic. Series 1 and Series 2 are already out already. So the whole world of the brilliant world of Tom Gates is everywhere now. So for dyslexic children, you know, there are different ways to tell stories, and look what can happen.
Really important message. How you have time to design your own earrings
I know.
amid all of that.
Well, honestly, I'm
know.
just doing exactly the same thing that I've done when I was younger, and you know, that's what I love, showing children to do that kind of thing.
They can do so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, really lovely to meet you. Liz Fisher, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the weekend will bring unseasonably warm conditions, especially to the southeast, whereas heavy rain will affect Scotland. Ireland, Northern Ireland and central Britain will be rather dull this morning, with some outbreaks of rain, heavy in places. Fog will affect some coasts and hills as well. Elsewhere, though, it'll be mainly dry with plenty of sunshine.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That's it from me for today, but Wilfred Frost is up next with all the latest on Labour's victory in the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election. All that and the top stories coming up next.